Before we get started, I would like to invite, we have a wonderful day planned out for you guys, but I would like to invite our president, President Luis Sanchez, to come do the official welcome, and then we'll get started with our program. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thanks. Hey, I just learned a new technique for getting applause, so thank you very much for that, Emmanuel. So, good morning, everyone. It's a good day here at Moorpark College. It's a beautiful spring day. It doesn't get much better than this. And I'm so excited about the topic and our guest speaker, about whom I've been hearing such great things. And I had a chance to meet with him for a little bit and connect on a personal level. I wish I could stay, truly, if I could allocate my time the way I choose entirely, I wish I could spend the whole day here with you. I can't. I've got to leave probably at about the first break. But I'm so interested in how the entire day goes for us. I've been in interviews lately, final interviews for a couple of faculty positions. I've got a couple more coming up. And in those interviews, invariably, one or more of the candidates will ask, what's the culture at Moorpark College? And connected to that, what do you like best about working here? And the very first answer that always comes out, I mean, it never fails to come out, is that we have this culture of collegiality and of civility. It's palpable, it is diffused throughout the organization, and it makes an enormous difference in terms of the pleasure we get in working here. Am I right? And here's the part that doesn't come out as clearly, but it's also sort of built into that culture. And by the way, that culture is exactly what we need at every level of our national and international dialogue, right? Respect, listening to each other, finding common ground, disagreeing when we have to disagree, but doing so agreeably. So I think this culture is a model for the rest of the world. The part that doesn't always come out, and I'm not sure if it's just a little more subtle, but you know how obnoxiously I've been touting our fourth place ranking on the national stage. Fourth best community college in the U.S., right? All right, so thank you. And very recently, we were named the best community college in California on some fairly objective criteria. So I try not to gloat, right? But it's kind of hard not to be proud of about that. And why is that? I mean, there are so, you know, we have 114, is it 114 these days, sister colleges around the state, and all have some similar DNA in the types of students that we serve and in our philosophy around education. And we are like the front lines of preserving our democratic republic and helping our students land good careers so that they become responsible, engaged citizens. So what is it about Moorpark College that gets us to first place? There's the other part of the culture that I think is true is a sort of healthy competition in the way that we hire people, in the culture that we propagate, and you know, the way you influence your teammates in subtle and not so subtle ways. Because it's not enough for any of us to be mediocre at our jobs. Am I right? And we don't like to be surrounded by people who want to be mediocre at our jobs. We want to be surrounded by people who want to excel at our jobs. I know that, in fact, I have to look behind me all the time to make sure that I'm running fast enough for the people that are right there at my back so that I'm not surpassed by everybody else. And that's a healthy type of competition. It's not negative. It's not dark. It's a competition with ourselves, really, to be as best as we can be. Not for vacuous or vapid purposes, but for the best purpose possible, and that's in the service of students. That's the thing that turns us on, the thing we want to be so good at, and the thing that we get value from, because we know that when our passion is around the service of students, we're not just transforming the individual lives that you're currently thinking about in your minds, as I mentioned that. This morning I woke up to the great news about the student body elections and the number of candidates that ran, the very high voting rate for our students, the way that they're so engaged. And I have to confess that I was especially joyful about Peyton Robinson becoming the student body president. He's just this earnest, focused young man full of positive energy to change the world in positive ways. And so we know that we're not only transforming individual lives, we're changing the very fabric of society in a very positive way. And it gives me hope and it gives me encouragement. And in that spirit, then we approach today in our full desire, our wholehearted desire to continuously improve, to get better every day at the things that we do. And especially in the areas where we don't do as well, especially in serving those students who don't make it easily to college, who don't have the support systems at home, don't have generations of support and advice from their parents and their grandparents to guide them. That's exactly where we can do our best and want to do our best and are looking for ways to constantly improve. What an honor it is to pass the baton back to Dr. Gabe Bruin. Thanks to him so much, and to the great president of the Academic Senate, Nina Brown, for bringing Dr. Johnstone to us. And I'll let Dr. Gabe Bruin introduce Dr. Johnstone. Thank you, guys.
Before we go into introductions, I want to take the time to thank, did you guys enjoy the breakfast? Yes. And we got amazing lunch coming. Thanks to Alicia, my wonderful admin. Where is she? She not only plans and coordinates all the food and everything for Flex, but she deals with me every single day. So I appreciate her more than anything. But I also want to thank a couple of people before we start. I want to thank my co-chairs, Elizabeth Salas, who helps put this together. So Elizabeth, stand up, please, and be recognized. And then I also want to thank my partner in crime. We've been doing this for a long time, and I am sad to lose her because she is at the end of her term. She is the biggest advocate for faculty, students, staff, and we've been working together for, is it 3 years now? 3 years of coordinating professional development activities. We've done some amazing things. She has all the posters of all the speakers, the activities that we have on campus that we've had. So I want to say thank you for everything you've done to support student success, professional development, faculty and staff. We are going to miss you, but I know you'll be coming to our meetings. So round of applause for Miss Nina Brown. And I don't want to say replace Miss Brown, but my co-chair, Lee Ballestero, will be the new tri-chair, so she will be joining me, who also deals with me every single day. So I'm excited to work with Lee again as the new PD tri-chair. So Lee will be joining us in the fall or the summer. So without further ado, I would like to bring up the Academic Senate President, and I don't want to say former, but current co-chair of professional development, Ms. Nina Brown, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Kaburu. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's not about us. We're here for you. Could you just thank yourselves? This is a self-assigned flex day. No one has to be here. It looked like a long 4-day weekend to me, and you've chosen to be here. And those of you who are not faculty, and there's many of you in the room, and I'm so excited, they found time out of your work day to come and do this and then catch up afterwards. So I know it's thank you, and we will get to Dr. Rob Johnston. I just can't wait. But can we just, a round of applause for yourselves. Thank you so much for being here. So this California Pathways Project is a new initiative at the state level. I'm thinking that we've probably all heard about it in one way or another. What does it mean? All that stuff. It's been very much promoted by our new state chancellor, Eloy Oakley. It's all about student success. I think what we're doing today, and that's why I'm so thrilled to see all of you here, is making a decision about whether this is something that Moorpark College wants to be part of. And that's not a quick and easy decision. It needs to be extended, and everyone needs to be involved. So this is an introduction. What do we think? Where do we go next? So that's our focus today. I think I was so excited because Moorpark College has all these pathway traditions, bridges, pathways, whatever we call them. I was part of the learning communities, and I see many learning communities instructors here because this is what we were aiming for. We have people here who are part of the grants that go with Channel Islands and Northridge about transfer there. We have people here that are working with high schools on dual enrollment. We do all this stuff in bits and pieces, and Pathways appears to be a way of putting it together under one big focused umbrella. So that's why I was very interested and so excited when Emmanuel managed to get Dr. Rob Johnston to come. So, is this a good fit for us? Dr. Rob Johnston is going to give us a lot of data and figures and explanation. Dr. Johnston is a state leader in Pathways, and that really is an understatement. He is a national leader in Pathways, and you're going to Canada now? He's an international leader of Pathways. And through his National Center for Inquiry and Improvement, he is working with 2- and 4-year schools in this Pathways project. So I am incredibly excited to hear more. There's so much here. So let's just do Dr. Rob Johnston, let's hear more.
Thank you so much. It's very nice. Wow. All right. So how you guys doing this morning? Good? There's a lot of energy in this room for a Thursday morning where you didn't have to be here. So I will try to keep that energy moving. Let me get the clicker here. Tech support took about 30 seconds. Is the clicker, someone know where the clicker is? Is this a clicker? That doesn't look like a clicker. I've seen clickers, but. Is it in the cupboard behind me? We're going to let him work on that while I'm talking over here. Derailed quickly here. 30 seconds in, we got the first text for it. So, again, my name is Rob Johnston, and I want to tell you a little bit about my background, not out of any sense of pedigree, but just to share with you the journey I've been on. And it's a journey, oddly, in academia. I got my doctorate in social psychology in 1996 from the University of Oregon. Go Ducks. Exactly. See, we got a duck. Now, to be fair, I did undergrad at Stanford, so I do cheer for Stanford slightly more than Oregon, although when one sucks and the other doesn't, I cheer for the one that's doing better. And Oregon, we just lost all those guys to the NBA, so that's not going to happen again. So anyway, I graduated in 1996 and actually moved down here. I'm from the Bay Area, grew up in San Jose, and I moved down here, and I remember as I was driving into campus today, this looks familiar. I did an interview, part-time faculty interview here in 1996 to be a psychology faculty. I remember I actually got an assignment, but at that time I got a job for an evaluation firm. The mechanics just didn't work out. So I worked in industry for about 7 years, but it's a weird journey to come back around to here. So I worked in industry for 7 years, increasingly in the world of strategic consulting and helping companies use data to help marketing strategy and their overall strategies. And and he's either going to hit me with something or hand me this. Yep. All right, we're good. And I worked in industry until about 2002. My last company I joined in industry. It's good timing, by the way. I joined an internet consulting firm in July of 2000. That was good timing for those of you old enough in the room to remember what happened shortly after that. We had 2,800 consultants in 27 cities when I joined, and I led the strategy around customer relationship management. And 18 months later, we had 175 consultants in 4 cities. And I got to be typecasting Norm from Cheers, going around firing people for the last 9 months I worked there. That was so much fun to just go around and, yeah, so I was about tired of industry by then. And the only reason I landed back in the community college sector, and I give my late father a lot of credit for this, is I was looking on Monster, which was the dominant search engine at the time. I'm like looking for jobs, and some sort of data meets strategy, meets consulting. And this job popped up, institutional researcher, Foothill College. First of all, I said, what the hell is an institutional researcher? I don't know what that is. Then I read the job description, I'm like, well, this sounds kind of cool. Then I read the salary, I'm like, well, that's not cool. Wait a minute, this didn't work out so well. But I just, on a whim, it was like a dean position, I just kind of took the interview, and I happened to land at a place in 2002 at Foothill where President Bernadine Fong, some of you may remember, and Bob Barr, one of the authors of The Learning College, happened to be there, and they convinced me that this was my calling, was to actually marry my consulting with higher education with data. And I started as the Dean of Institutional Research at Foothill College in 2002. and worked up there for 6 years, the latter 3 as vice president of instruction for the that was kind of a weird shift. It's like a Tom Clancy novel. What they've actually, this new show, Designated Survivor, I think is what happened. Like the first 7 people get knocked off and all of a sudden you're VPI. I'm like, what the hell happened here? It was a little better than that, but not much. No one died. There were no animals harmed either in the making of that. But I served as VPI at Foothill from 2005 to 2008. Some of you may remember I was the lead administrator on the first Basic Skills Initiative, going all the way back, working with the State Academic Senate back in 2005, and was one of the authors on the Poppy Copy, back for those of you who go way back, which, by the way, I think is probably, as I look back on it now, about 85% wrong, knowing what we know today. But we'll come back to that. we'll talk about that today. Somewhere about 85%. It was right for the time, though. And in 2008, I moved, actually, because I needed to get therapy after being a VP for 3 years, which the good news is you can be a productive member of society again after being a VP. So there's that. You guys are, she's like, great, wonderful. You're always going to quickly identify the VPs in the room at that moment. And then I actually, to do a lot of this state level, I went to work for the RP group for a couple of years, and I was actually was asked to head the national strategy for the RP group when we had that for a little while, and worked, the first 2 national projects we got when they said go on the national strategy were Completion by Design and the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. And I worked on those under the RP group umbrella from about 2010 to 2013 when I went off on my own. And RP kind of focused back on California, so that's a long story over a couple of beers. But I went off on my own and formed this NCII, the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement, continuing to work on Completion by Design and the Aspen Prize. So I've spent the last 7 years on the road, literally on the road. I was 230,000 air miles last year. I was on the road 180 days in 93 cities. And so, and now I'm engaged with someone who lives in Connecticut, which is really convenient since I live in Santa Cruz. It's good timing, it's good, it's really close to each other there. So I've spent a lot of time on the road working with colleges. I love this work, and we're gonna talk about this kind of movement that is Guided Pathways today, but it's more than that. It's, as you guys talked about, it's a focus on what we need to do to change the conditions so that more of our students complete. Now, you guys at Moorpark are working from a foundation of doing very well. I will make a little bit of fun of the state California scorecard in California because it makes it look better than it is. It was done intentionally to make it look better than it is, by the way, because at the time the scorecard came out, we were fighting against a certain Cal State University Sacramento professor who while heart was in the right place, often talked about how bad the community college system was in California, putting out rates that were probably lower than what the actual rate is. And so the scorecard, we need to remember that when we look at our scorecard rates, it's easy to get a false sense of security because it takes a lot of people out of the denominator. It takes a lot of people out of the denominator, like people who aren't certificate seeking, degree seeking, or transfer seeking, and it's pretty liberal. It's gotten a little better in who it takes out of the denominator. So hey, you guys at Moorpark, I just looked it up, you're at 64% on the scorecard, or 62% or whatever. That looks great, but it doesn't mean that 62% of the people who come to Moorpark actually reach their goals. And we'll talk about the distinction here, and the reason that I'm gonna have to do that, and it's not to downplay how well Moorpark has done, but I'm gonna say in a second here, you gotta believe there's a problem that needs solving, and that it's urgent enough that you need to do something about it. And I did not sense any sense of complacency in any of the comments here, and I don't feel that in the room, but a big condition, any change model you look at, the 9 million color-coded 7-step change models that my industry colleagues will give you, like Cotter and all these other ones, you know, they all start with, there has to be a sense of urgency. And that's something we're gonna talk about today. I hope I instill that in you a little. It's not to scare you, because I think you're doing very well on a number of fronts already. Absolutely, relatively. Absolutely, relatively. Can you do that? No. Relatively to California. But working on these national projects, so I was on Completion by Design, which was the first national Guided Pathways project, right? It started in 2011. This was basically a bribe from the Gates Foundation to take the ideas of the Community College Research Center, CCRC, close partner of mine, Davis Jenkins, and his team wrote the book recently. I usually joke that Davis Jenkins, if he's in the room, I call him the father of Guided Pathways. When he's not in the room, I call him the grandfather of Guided Pathways, because he's older than me, and I just like doing that to screw with him. And I'm the weird uncle. So I came along after Davis, and this merry group of people, actually my fiance, Gretchen Schmidt, who works for AACC, Kay McClenny, this group of national folks who've been working on this stuff, the folks at Jobs of the Future, Public Agenda, We're all there in the early days of completion by design, and we did not have much to go on. We had these ideas, these observations from behavioral economics and social psychology that too much choice does not help people make rational and informed decisions. We looked at the success rates of community colleges around the country and saw we have a significant problem. The national average for completing, for any first-time in college students, so full denominator, either completing a certificate or degree of more than 1 year and or transferring is about 35%, right? My guess is you guys are a little bit higher than that. I don't think you're that much higher than that. Maybe you're in the low 40s, right? Right. And so this is different than the scorecard metric, but when we looked at this data nationally, and by the way, who do we see has a bigger problem achieving these numbers? Low-income students, first-time in college students, and we're going to talk a lot about equity and economic mobility in the next 90 minutes, and for those of you who stay all day. We know very well in this country, California knows this more than most, that unfortunately in this country, those two things are correlated with being a student of color. There's absolutely rural white poverty in America. We'll talk about that too. We don't have to talk about that as much here as I do when I'm in, say, Ohio or Wisconsin, like when I'm out in the sticks in Ohio and Wisconsin, which, by the way, happens a lot. You have to talk about rural white poverty there. But in places that are like California, like Texas, like Florida, like New York, where I spend a lot of time, there's a correlation. We didn't cause that relationship between being a student of color and low income status. But it is our problem to potentially help solve, and I will make a case in a minute. It may be only our problem these days, that we are the sector of education that this problem has fallen to, and whether we like it or not, it's our problem. So we'll talk about that too. But completion by design, back in 2011, we had no thought capital, we had no colleges who'd done this. We did have a couple stories, of, interestingly, of four-year schools, and I'll talk about those too, who set the table for the Guided Pathways movement. And I will start, by the way, by telling you, after this brief soliloquy, brief being potentially a worry. We'll start with the story of Georgia State University, which is one of the progenitors of the Guided Pathways movement, and I will explain to you why that's relevant to you in the community college sector. But in 2011, we didn't have that. So we had 9 colleges. We started with 15 colleges in 4 states. Through some attrition, we ended up with 9 colleges in 3 states in North Carolina, Ohio, and Florida working on this. And there was no thought capital. The first early years of completion by design were a little chaotic. But over the time, we developed a sense of thinking about these big ideas of guided pathways, which you'll see them later, by the way. And all these slides you'll get, so take notes if you will, but you'll get all the slides. I usually say that, by the way, 5 minutes from the end, which is really helpful to people when they're just like, thanks, dude, I just took notes for the last 2 hours. It's great. That the 4 big ideas of guided pathways are giving students a clear path to completing their program. What does it look like? What do we need to take in what order, right? And I'll mention we do this in certain parts of our institution already. So that's the first thing, is focusing on the program and the clear path through the institution. To do that, you need to know where students are trying to go, right? 80% of your students, 80, 75, 85% of your students want one of 2 things. They either want to enter the workforce directly through a certificate or degree program that moves them directly into the workforce, or they want to transfer with junior standing in a major. And that's a big clause that we put on the end of that. Transfer is great. But transferring and retaking a year, because these bridges aren't built the way we need to build them, so that when someone does transfer, they have junior standing in a major, is a big deal. That describes 80% of your students. California, by the way, does a really good job naming a group of students that nationally we don't really have a name for, and that's the Skills Builders group, right? The group who comes in, takes 1 or 2 courses, they need a C++ course. That's a little old. They probably don't need that anymore. It's like saying they need Corel the robot. They need a course here, they need a financial accounting course, they need 1 or 2 courses to build, to either get the next job or keep them in their current job. And we, by the way, and California's done a great job identifying this group and kind of measuring it, but even in California, where we do a pretty good job with this, and we have technology being bigger than it is in most states, still about 20 to 25% of your students max. Nationally, it's more like 15. So 75, 80, 85% of your students are on some path to either direct enter in the workforce, completing a certificate or degree, or transfer. And that's an important understanding we need to come to. I mean, the lifelong learning notion of community colleges in California, which I'm a huge believer in, has largely been made more challenging by policy changes over the last 10 years, right? Taking 1 course for Italian or corporate fitness or serving the community. And we didn't actually make that decision at the colleges. It was kind of made for us. And you can debate that. Like in the perfect world, you would do both. The problem, I think, of course, from a resource side is California has I love my state, a moronic funding model. It is absolutely the worst funding model in the country, where we don't keep tuition. All the tuition goes to the state. It's doled back out in apportionment. That's bad enough. Only 2 or 3 states do that. But the enrollment cap idea is absolutely insane. The idea that you have to play the Price is Right, which is hit your cap number without going over. Like, I want to go off on a whole rant here, but the whole way we have to manage enrollment in California is completely nuts. So this movement, though, of guided pathways actually will help with that problem, too. So you fast forward from 2011, we're mucking around in these 3 states, and I spent much of the last 5 years doing a lot of these days, keynotes and workshops, Davis Jenkins, Gretchen, Kay McClenny, all firing people up. And then 2 things happened that I think are really important for this movement. One, in 2013, the American Association of Community Colleges, AACC, whose convention starts tomorrow, which I'm going to, came out with a report called the 21st Century Learning Commission Report. Now, this was really interesting. So this is an organization, by the way, that is essentially your trade organization in DC, right? They fight for us in national discourse about education, talk about how we're underfunded. They do a really good job, and they also do a lot of leadership development to try to, training people to be CEOs. Did not mess around a whole lot in the kind of ground level practice issues of community colleges. It was really a policy and kind of a trade organization, if you will. In 2013, it's a huge shift. This 21st Century Learning Commission report, I'm paraphrasing, essentially said, we here in the community college sector have been doing an amazing job with limited resources and challenging student populations. But we need to fundamentally rethink the way our colleges are set up and the way students move through those colleges so that vastly more students complete. Now, this is like your union saying, good job, but we need to take what we do and evolve it 3 more levels if we're really gonna get this job done. That was a big moment. It kind of was quiet, but it was a big moment. And then 2 years later, so the Guided Pathways movement stays, in 2015, we opened up a national pathways project, the next big, there's state projects going on. I worked on a bunch of them in Michigan, Arkansas, Washington, Hawaii. I did like that gig. That was a good one. Ohio, a lot of state projects on guided pathways going on. And then in 2015, we opened up this national project. So back in 2011, by the way, the completion by design colleges, that was a $50 million plus project from Gates, right? And not all of that went to the 9 colleges, but they got somewhere in the low 7 figures, $1–2 million over the 5-year period. It was essentially a bribe to try guided pathways and help us figure it out, right? Help us figure out what this is, help us develop thought capital we could share with the field, help us learn what it means to implement guided pathways. And we did. The flip side of that, though, is it also helped generate this interest. So in 2015, when Gates funded its next National Pathways project, 2 things happened. One, the 4 organizations who are the kind of national assistance team on CBD, CCRC, my organization, RP/NCII, Jobs for the Future and Public Agenda, all came to the new project, but we added in 4 other organizations because of the interest in guided pathways. It was being run by AACC. Achieving the Dream was involved now. The Aspen Institute, who I've spent a lot of time working with over there, they're involved now behind it, as well as CESI, the folks who do student engagement. So now you've basically got the big 8 national organizations who all are saying, this is what we need to do. We open up a call for applications that basically says, hey, if you say you're going to do this project, first of all, this is in 2015, you're going to fully implement guided pathways for all students who need them starting in fall of 2018. So a 3-year development cycle, which is aggressive by higher ed standards, by the way. You guys know things take time. We're going to talk about that today. So that's aggressive. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to come to a series of 6 institutes spread out over the country, with a team of 5 to 7 people, and the CEO, president, has to go to all 6. And if you say you're not going, Kay McClenny finds you and says you're going. And she brings up the participation agreement and says, you signed here saying you're going, we need you in the room. So this is big investment of leadership. And by the way, no money went to the colleges. Not only did no money go to the colleges had to pay their way for those teams to get to the institute. The funding covered the partners and running, you guys know running institutes costs a lot, the hotel and the logistics. So that was paid for. But they had to pay these teams to get there, and they were spread out all over the country. We're about to do the 5th one now in Fort Lauderdale. So we had no idea when we opened this if anyone would apply. We could take up to 30. Within 2 weeks after we announced the applications 2 years ago, 200 colleges of the 1,100 across the country had contacted AACC and said, we're really interested. Somewhere between 100 and 125 applied. The reason for the drop there was not actually the money, but it was we required them in a horribly long application to talk about their history of scaled change and their efforts on their campus that would pave the way for this. And we also required their academic, their version, whatever their version of the academic senate, faculty leadership to sign off on the grant. So it wasn't just administration saying we want to do this without a base of faculty, because even outside California, that doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work in California. So we opened the doors, we got those 100 and some applications. It was a really hard process. We ended up picking 30 colleges from 17 states, and another 30 immediately said, we were really pissed we didn't get in. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with that. But these 30 colleges, there's 3 from California, which I think was also a huge sign, because California hadn't played in many national projects historically. And that is Mount Sac, down the road here, Irvine Valley, and Bakersfield, all were accepted into the national project. And we're in year 2, near the end of year 2 in that project. We've run 4 of the 6 institutes, with two remaining. And part of the funding for that project was that Gates wanted there to be state replications of the national model. So with local funders combining with Gates. And so Texas kind of started out the door last fall with a project, and here in California, one was hatched last year with the College Futures Foundation as the driver of this. Gates put some money in. So we're running now a California Guided Pathways project, and we only had funding to take 20 colleges. Again, not only does no funding go to the colleges are actually paying $15,000 a year to help support this over 3 years. So they're putting in $45,000 of their own money. Now you can use equity or whatever other student success plan funds for that. But that process, we opened the doors. We're not talking about how many applicants we got, because it's more political in California. We got a good number of applicants. We had a really, we just finished our selection processes. On Monday, we announced the 20 colleges that were chosen to serve in the California Guided Pathways Initiative. So I've been saying 15 to 20 colleges for a year, because I wasn't sure there were 20 who were ready in California, to be completely honest with you. And we were overwhelmed by not only the readiness, and look, you never know you're ready till you get into it and start trying to change things, but the passion with which people in California understood the relationship between this way of thinking and what their students needed and where their college needed to go, we were all very impressed by. And so these 20 colleges were just named on Monday, and you guys didn't apply for this, and a lot of colleges had a choice about whether to apply for this. The choice is complicated, because there's also the $150 billion in the governor's budget that will be coming down to support Guided Pathways if it goes through, which will certainly result in a lot of opportunities to do things like what we're doing. And the 20 colleges I'm going to be working with as the project director, we will be creating materials that we'll give to everyone in the state, right? So I think you can expect to hear a lot more on this in the coming months. This movement is definitely not going away. As Emmanuel said, I mean, and Dr. Sanchez said, Eloy is on this, right, at the state level. I mean, he was the president at Long Beach, who was a little bit known for bucking the system a little bit, and he pushed some things in this direction there, and he, I think, really thinks that this is something that he wants to give people this is California, right? All we can do in California is give you the opportunity to step up and do something. We don't force people to do things in California. I work in other states where that happens, and you can't actually really force colleges to do anything, but you really can't in California. So one of the things about the 20 is I am not saying I'm running the California Guided Pathways. I'm not running a Guided Pathways project for all of California. These are 20 colleges who signed on to do it a certain way, and we're going to work with those 20 colleges, but the other 95 get to choose their own path, and there will be numerous paths on how you either interact or not interact with Guided Pathways. So that was my short setup. I'm on slide 2. It's good. Hope you guys are good too, but I got a red-eye tonight at 9, so I got all kinds of time. So nothing like the red-eye in Newark from LAX. All right, so let's dive into this. Let's dive into what are we talking about here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to do 4 things this morning. 3 of them before the break. We're going to go till about 10:45 and take a break. I'm going to tell the Georgia State story. This is something I started doing recently. I got asked to do it. This is one of the best things that happened to me in the last year. I got asked to do a presentation on Guided Pathways without using the term Guided Pathways, because it was a bad word at the college. This is in Ohio. And so they said, we want you to get us to where we say, we want to do that, and then in the last 10 minutes call it Guided Pathways. Like, well, this is new. I mean, I get bored doing the same thing every time, so I'm like, sure, I'll work there. And the way we're going to work there, actually, is through the angle, and by the way, they had titled this day, like, Student Equity Day. Now, I love it when we title one day that, but that's a whole other story, right? And you're going to hear the white guy in the Hawaiian shirt talk a lot about equity, by the way, today. And I do that with a full sense of the privilege that I've been granted. And I also do it with a sense of all of my black and brown colleagues who go, at least it's finally not just us talking about this, right? One of my favorite things when I go to my college, I hear, here's our diversity director, who's, by the way, 99% black or brown. And what that lets a lot of colleges do is that person's responsibility is diversity or equity. The rest of us get to go on doing the same thing we were always doing. Not that that would ever happen at Moorpark, but we have to think about how we have to think about equity together. We have to solve problems systemically. We have lots of great, California's got Puente and Fumo, all kinds of great programs, right, in California. But right now, they're swimming upstream against a system that is relatively designed to not help those students get through. I think Puente and Fumo are really important programs, and I think if you go down this path, those type of programs will work even better because they'll be working in tandem with the overall movement, right? So we're going to talk about equity, and we're going to talk a lot about economic mobility today. And then I'm going to get into the guided pathways exploration. And I guarantee you some fun in there because I also recently found a different way to do PowerPoint that's actually bringing in a game show. So it's a little dorky, but I promise you it'll be fun. And if you don't think it's fun, I do, which is all I really care about in the end anyway, because I do 100 of these a year. So, all right. So let's talk about Georgia State. I titled this The Reason for Optimism. And I said earlier, you got to have two things to believe, for me to believe that anything's going to take on anything that really moves the needle at a campus in a fundamental or structural way. You got to believe there's a problem, and you got to believe there's a range of things that might work to help address the problem. That's what this story is about. Anyone from Georgia, from Atlanta? Not a common path to Moore Park, but it does happen, by the way. I'm in weird places and like, yeah, I went there. Georgia State University is a regional urban four-year school. Now, one of the many myths about higher education is that all four-year schools have really good graduation rates and all two-year schools don't, right? Now, California, by the way, until recently, the CSU system, and so every state has a flag. California is different, but every state usually has one or two flagships. I often get myself in trouble by, I did this in Texas last week, and I said, you know, the flagship in Texas, UT, the Orange School, I was in College Station, which is where A&M is. And as I was saying, I'm like, this is about to go south. And then I said something like, well, in Texas, you clearly have two flagships. Texas, and actually they do. Because you have one or two schools who are fairly selective, who have graduation rates that hover around 75 to 85%. Here in California, the UC system, when you talk about Berkeley or UCLA, those are the type of schools that have that completion rate. It's a little lower in the other UCs, by the way, down into the 70s and 60s. There's usually a second flagship in most states. I mean, the example I often use is a place like Michigan, right? You've got Ann Arbor, who's one of the top elite publics in the country, who has like an 85% completion rate. And then you've got Michigan State, which is about 70. And then you've got a bunch of regional schools, commonly in the sports world called the directional schools. Northeast Tennessee, Southwest Missouri, Northeast Louisiana, West Texas. And these are very good institutions, right? The point is not that these aren't good institutions, but the selectivity of the student population results in their having lower completion rates. And what most people don't know is that the average for those regional four-year schools around the country is in the 40s. The CSU system, anyone know what it is in CSU now as a system? It's gone up 10 points in the last decade, I'll tell you that. It used to be 46%, the entire CSU system. Now it's in the mid-50s, which is a huge step, by the way. But at a lot of regional four-year schools, these numbers are in the 40s, 30s, and even 20s. I was in Michigan last week, and there's a couple Michigan schools whose regional four-year college has a graduation rate around 26%, right? Now, all you guys, I see the faces in the room, so that is something that happens, by the way, and I think the reason this is important to us is if you're to look at what percentage of our students who try to transfer get a four-year degree within 6 years, our numbers are in the 20s and 30s as well. Because we have a transfer rate problem, plus, by the way, our native our transfers do better in many cases than the native freshmen at the four-year schools, but it's still only 60, 62% graduating after transfer, right? Which means there's 40% who don't graduate after transfer, right? And that problem historically has been invisible to us. One of the things the Aspen Prize has really focused people on is the notion of what are your completion rates after transfer. What are your workforce outcomes after someone goes in the workforce? And this is a movement that California is kind of picking up on that I think we're going to see a lot more of in the next couple of years. The point here is Georgia State's like us. They're a regional four-year school. Their student population, if you were to look at SAT scores and look at our students' SAT scores, it's pretty close to ours, right? They're actually serving very similar populations. Now, they had a 31% graduation rate if you go back now almost 15 years now into the early 2000s. Now, like I said, the community college completion plus transfer rate nationally is 35%. So we're actually at fairly similar rates, and that's only the first 2 years. If you go to the four-year, the four-year number of folks so the national numbers, I have this in another set of slides I'm not doing today, but of any 100 students who enter community colleges nationally, 80% say they intend to earn a bachelor's degree at some point in their education. So 8 out of 10 say they are. 16% have done that within 6 years. So 1 in 6. So, I mean, and I think it's a little better in California. It's probably a little better at Moorpark. But when you look long term, we're not doing that great either, collectively, right? Neither are the regional four-year schools, by the way. The point here being that the problem they're dealing with is very much like our problem. So this place gets, this is a really important step. They get a new president, a new provost, and those two people look at the data and they say, this is not okay. It's not okay that we have a 31% essentially success rate with our students, so that 7 out of 10 students who start here do not reach their goals. And I will tell you this, if you don't reach this point of this is not okay, you're not going to do the things you need to do at scaled levels to get to the promised land of having better graduation rates. You have to believe that A, it's not okay right now, and B, we think there's something we can do about this. So this is where they got, and this is before there's no guided pathways movement around. There's not even a term guided pathways. So they start looking around at data. This is what we all do. I'm an old IR guy. We start asking some good research questions, right? We say, all right, let's look at some data. So they looked at a bunch of things, and then they looked at one of my least favorite variables as an IR guy in the history of higher ed, fall-to-fall retention. Completely useless, by the way, as a variable, yet we all measure it because it's really easy to measure. And one of the many reasons it's useless, by the way, it's maybe not useless, not very useful, shouldn't be as pejorative, is when you measure it over any 10-year period at a college, it looks exactly like this. Now, yours wouldn't be at 80% because that's a 4-year school. At a 2-year school, what's probably 60% here? Anyone? Fall to fall, somewhere in the 60% range. But if you measure it over a 10-year period, it's going to bounce around that number by 1 or 2 points. Sometimes in smaller community colleges, you'll see a bump of 10 points one way or the other, largely because of the economy. The economy tanks, we get more students. So we have 1 year where retention's really high, 2012. And then when the economy gets better, those kind of transitional students leave and the retention rate tanks, and then it goes back to where it was. So this is a little different at a 4-year school. But you look at this and a couple of things. One, it's not telling us that much, right? Okay, 80%, it's kind of 81 and 82. Although it does point out there's another myth of higher education that we're talking about here, which is if you just get students through the first year, everything's okay. Well, apparently not, because you got 4 out of 5 of them, 8 out of 10 through the first year, and only 3 out of 10 are finishing. So half the students at Georgia State made it through the first year, but never finished. So what's going on there? So we're good culture of inquiry people. We asked more research questions. They asked a bunch. And the one that was their epiphany moment, which I think really set a ball rolling for a lot of us here, is they asked an interesting question, which is, all right, let's talk about retention. We got that chart. But let's ask the question, how many of our students are retained and have sophomore status? Meaning that they are 1/4 of the way to a 4-year degree, 120 semester units. They're 30 units on track, transferable units, toward the degree. And at Georgia State in fall of 2000, that number was 22%. So they had 8 of 10 students, but only 1 in 5, or 2 in 10, were on track. Now, before you wince too much, because I'm seeing all the wincing, by the way, ask yourself what that would be here. What percentage of your students are halfway to a 2-year degree or halfway to transferring on path after a year? Now, there are 2 groups of students who I'm going to talk about later who, if you take them out, the number is next to 0. There are 2 groups of students for whom that happens a lot. That's the preview. You can see if you're paying attention in 20 minutes and see if you catch that. But if the overall average in most community colleges is about 15%. So 1 in 6, 1 in 7 students are on path after a year. Now, why is that, by the way? Why would it be a problem at Georgia State, or why would it be a problem at Moorpark that students aren't on path after a year? Developmental ed, call it basic skills, call it what you will, none of those units count, right? I will tell you one thing about your students, is that exactly 0% of them came here to major in basic skills. 0%. And somewhere between 2 and 5% came here to major in math or English. Okay? Now, before you get mad at me, math and English faculty, which is likely to happen later anyway, so you might as well just save it. I'm kidding. I love math and English faculty. But what I will say about this is they're not here for math and English. Math and English are important. We have decided they are important for a set of lifelong learning outcomes, or the gen ed outcomes, computation, communication, whatever we call them. We've decided these are important, but it is really important to remember your students aren't here for those. They're here to do something else. CCRC talks, one of the big other pillars I gave you one earlier, that was helpful. The second pillar is how do you get students into programs earlier? Part of how you get them into programs earlier is tell them about the programs and actually help them with career counseling and advising and say, hey, what do you want to do with your life? Another way is to get them through DevEd more quickly, because they're not here for DevEd. They're not here for basic skills. They're here to get interested in something else. And again, I am in no way underplaying the importance of basic skills, math, and English courses. However, we may have learned nationally, and I think in California as well some, there are a lot of other ways to do this than the way we used to do it historically, and we will talk about that. So that's one way, DevEd. What are some other ways students don't get to, say, 30 here at Moorpark after a year? They're working. So part-time student status is the #1 response to this question. Like, our students are working. So 2 things on this. 1, it's absolutely a problem. 3 things. 1, it's absolutely a problem. 2, is that there's been this assumption historically that we can't move this rate. We can't change the rate at which students go full-time or part-time, which we have learned nationally is completely untrue. You actually can affect the percentage of students who come to your college full-time or more full-time in 2 ways. 1, I wear a different hat of the last 5 years working on student financial stability. The idea that tying students to public benefits and working on nutrition and childcare and healthcare and transportation, all the things that keep them from getting here, you used to help them work on those things. Maybe not do that all yourself, but tie students to make sure there's a streamlined way to get students the benefits they're entitled to. You can get more of them to go full-time. But the second way may be even more important. It's a guided pathways mentality. So I travel the country constantly, as I said, and I spend a lot of time in bars and restaurants, maybe the occasional brew pub, which explains the physical side of me. I do like good beer. So I hang out in these places. I'm watching a game at night, watching the Sharks or something, watching the Warriors, and I've got my computer. And so after a while, bartender or waitress will say to me, hey, what do you do? Basically, why are you in my bar with a computer? Is basically what they're saying. But they like it, and so I'm affable. I talk to them. I say, you know what, I work in higher ed. I actually work to help mainly community colleges and regional 4-year schools work on improving their outcomes so more students reach their goals and complete. I cannot tell you how many times that when I say that, said student would say, let's say I'm in Simi Valley, oh, cool, I go to Moorpark College. You see this all the time when you're out in your community. I go to Moorpark College. So then, being me, I ask the next one, so what are you doing at Moorpark? The answer to this is one of 3 things usually. 1 is, I don't know. 2 is even better, I go to Moorpark College. They repeat back to me the same thing again. Or the third one is one of my favorite, I take classes there. I'm just taking a couple classes. Right? You hear this all the time, I'm just taking a couple classes. Why? Because we've made it really easy to just dip your toes in the water with us. There's no investment on their part, there's no engagement, it's just kind of the next thing. We're going to talk a lot later about how many of your students actually have a clear goal in mind or have been helped to get a clear goal, because the students I talk to when I'm out in public, they don't. They don't know why they're here. They know that this is a good idea for them in the aggregate. Higher ed is good. That's about as deep as many of them are going. And I'm not sure I was any deeper when I went to higher ed as, by the way, a low-income student, that I knew this was helping me. I didn't know how. I'm going to make the argument that this is, by the way, on a number of fronts going to be good for Moorpark. You got a value proposition problem. Your students do not understand why they're here and what they could get out of you. And it's not just about workforce, and I'm going to later talk about this false distinction we have between workforce and transfer, which is ridiculous, by the way. I mean, a quarter of your students who are in career tech degrees, classically cohort career tech degrees, transfer within 4 years, which at many colleges is actually higher than the transfer rate of your gen ed students. So that's a false distinction. And if you don't think your gen ed students are interested in workforce, think again, because every single one of them wants a job when they're done with higher education. I asked this question later, but how many students do you think are here for the love of learning? Out of 100. By the way, I did this last week. I was at this college in Michigan, and the faculty member in the back raises her hand. She teaches poli-sci. I actually asked my students that question. Why are you here? And I give them a multiple choice, including the love of learning. In 10 years she's done it, no one's ever chosen it. Not a single student. Now, this is different for us, right? Because we're academics, right? We love learning. We love it so much we do it, right? We work at a place that's all about learning. So there is this mindset of everyone's like little versions of us, or younger versions of us. They're not, right? But less than 5% of them are ever going to go into something resembling academia, right? So this is one problem we have. But to them, there's not a clear value proposition. This is another reason students don't go full-time. It's not that simple. I worked 30 hours a week when I went full-time. Not everyone can do that. I was 19. It's harder to do that when you're 24 with 2 kids, right? Or 35 with 2 kids, trying to redo it again. So these are complicated issues. I'm not trying to minimize them, but I do think we do have an ability to affect this. So two big answers, which are great: basic skills and part-time student stats. What are some others to why this happens? Yeah. Where's the mother? The others. Oh, Mike, we're going to parents that quickly? We don't usually blame poor students' parents till later in the day. That's usually an advanced version where we. If these families just were better, no, yeah, I love that, by the way. Don't get me started on the if the families were just better thing. I may get started later anyway. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Full-time is 12. What's 12 times 2? But someone usually makes a joke about algebra at this point. They need algebra. That's quantitative reasoning. That's not algebra. It's arithmetic. We'll get there. Yeah, 12 units is not full. 12 units is full-time for financial aid. I mean, our friends at Complete College America, who occasionally have some draconian ways of getting their points across, have this project called 15 to Finish. Yeah, 15's halfway to 30, 1/4 of the way to 60, right? Not everyone can do it, but this assumption that somehow 12 is magic, it's not. Any other reasons? How about one, they're not taking the actual courses they should be taking to help them on their path? And we're going to give you some examples of this later, which are pretty painful, by the way. But, you know, you look at transcripts, you see here, I got a business major here. I've taken 5 of my psych classes. After the first one, the second 4 were completely useless. Right? Yeah, what else? Changing their mind's a big point. We're going to talk a lot about changing your mind today, because that's usually when we get into the after the break of, well, how can students make these decisions when they're 18, 19? Aren't they going to change their mind a lot? Hold that thought. We're going to talk about that, because I think part of the point here is right now they change their mind too much because we haven't helped them decide anything. Right? They're partially changing their mind because they're randomly walking through everything, right, without any guidance. And then if they are going to change their minds, the question about when they do that, when they're here, is pretty. And to what major, right? Do we want them changing 3 years in, or do we want them changing 1 semester in? Well, clearly one of those is a better outcome, especially for low-income students. So that's another big one too. These are all, by the way, reasons that I think that we see these data. So Georgia State said, all right, before there's a guided pathway, this is the problem. We have to work on this. We have to get more students momentum in their first year. Goes all the way back to a paper Cliff Adelman, who was at the Department of Education for a long time, wrote back in the 80s about momentum is the key issue. He apparently was right. No one listened, as often happens. So they did a lot of things. You want to know what they did at Georgia State. What did they do? Highly structured programs of study. Students know exactly what to take in what order. If they are unsuccessful at some point in that pathway, they're called in to get them redirected. They always know what they're taking in what order. It's one thing they do. 2, they onboard students into those programs differently. What they're doing now, this is 15 years into it, they have freshman career interest communities that when students come into Georgia State, rather than choose from their 100 majors, they choose from one of 7 or 8 meta majors or career focus areas that then in their first year help them pick from the ones that come after it, and they're still perfectly on path to all of them. And they actually do that as a learning community as well, so the students travel together in small cohorts, which I think that came later. They fundamentally redid basic skills / dev ed. I actually am not the hugest fan of what they did. They modularized their content. I always worry when we go down the modularization front that we're just taking the same content, breaking it into chunks, and thinking that somehow magically that's going to work. At Georgia State, what they did, though, is they put a lot of resources around that to much more in a 1-on-1 or 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 way, help students in labs get through those things. It's working, so I mean, I can't nail it too much. But they did that. They do not let anyone fall through the cracks. I've never done the same presentation twice. I guarantee one rant that I will do every time, and I'll do it later. It's my pre-nursing rant. This has nothing to do with your nursing faculty, but it has to do with the hundreds, perhaps thousands of students who are at your college who think they're pre-nursing, who have a 0% chance of ever getting into your nursing program. And I'm not going to say any more because I'm going to take my own rant away later when it comes, but we'll talk about that. So these are all things they worked on. Don't let students go down unproductive paths. They've identified over time 7 markers for success in each of these 100 programs. If a student doesn't hit one of these markers, it triggers an automatic response from the college. Nobody falls through the cracks. Then you say, what happened over a 10-year period? Now, I've taught research methods and statistics a lot in my life, and I've made up a lot of data sets. I would never make up a data set that looked like this, unless there was like a final exam for a graduate level course. How does this happen? How is it possible that you're keeping the same number of students after the first year, but now 3 times as many are on PATH? They've tripled the rate of students who are on PATH. And by the way, one thing to notice here is it kind of goes up a little bit and shoots up the last 3 years. Everyone wants to know, hey, what was the secret sauce right here? Right? What they do, that's the thing right there. I got to do a site visit on these guys on another project. You know what they did? Versions 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 and 4.0 of everything they did learned from the previous version. They didn't give up after a year. They learned from what happened. This is a 10-year, now 15-year story of improvement. It's not overnight. You cannot do this with an acronym or even an initiative called the Guided Pathways Initiative. This is about long-term change and a different way of thinking about how we do business at the college. The other thing they did is they said they are human there in Georgia. It's not some magic place. They did all these things at the start in silos, like we always do. I got Dev Ed over here. I'm working on Dev Ed. I'm working on onboarding. I'm working on monitoring. And somewhere around year 5 or 6 that they got into this, they started tying it all together so that these things work together. So the 2 stories here that are important: 1, that you can move the needle on this. 2, it's long-term change. This does not happen overnight. I would say it doesn't have to take this long because we've learned from them what needs to happen, and we've taken a lot of this, combined it with our Guided Pathways work. But what I want you, if you're going to remember 2 slides from today, it's actually not this one, it's the next one, which is what happened to their graduation rate 10 years ago versus today by ethnicity. So what do you see here? What hops out at you? They've over doubled it for Hispanic and African American students. White students got 20 points better, right? It's a 67% improvement. And what does it end up in? It ends up as one of the handful of colleges in this country which has no so-called achievement gap. So let's hold on for a second about that term achievement gap, because some of us for a long time have been calling that out as that's something that yet again subtly or not subtly blames the student. It is their achievement that is the problem. Gloria Ladson-Billings, one of my favorite equity authors, wrote about 10 years ago, maybe we should stop talking about the achievement gap and talk about the educational debt that we've accumulated as a system that results in these outcomes. Interesting way. I hope she's seen this data now because she was right. Because it wasn't about the students. It was about us. Well, painful. It was about the system. Right? So what they've done at Georgia State, they did not, and by the way, I want to be clear, I love programs like Puente and Mfumo, African American male mentoring programs. Those are all really good programs. But that's not how you fix this problem. Because those problems, if you're trying to fix it with a small set of programs as one-offs, A, you're missing 95% of your students, and B, those programs are swimming upstream. Now, some of what those programs are doing are part of the Guided Pathways movement. They're helping monitor progress and helping students along the way. But the idea here was they fixed the system. And now you have one of the only colleges in the country that has African American and Hispanic students graduating at higher rates than white students. Couple back, yeah.
Isn't white the minority of that college?
It is now. It wasn't. It just, you actually, thank you for setting that up perfectly. Stepson graduated, and he's African American, right? See, I'm quick that way. But no, it doesn't have to be though. She could have adopted. I don't make assumptions. I'm a psychologist, right? Yeah, so this Georgia State University, right? So 10 years ago, they were 60% white. 30% African American, and 10% Latino. Now it's flipped. They are almost 60% African American, 30% white, and 10% Latino still. So this rhetoric around, and there's rhetoric here too, when we talk about challenging student populations, we mean black, brown, and poor, right? Let's just call that out. We can't do these with students these days, which also is code in many cases for black, brown, and poor, right? So apparently none of that's true. Because we have a long history of subtly and not subtly putting the issue on the student, and I did joke about the mother when you said other, just to be clear, and blaming their families as if higher education is not important to low-income students. I would argue higher education is really important to low-income students, and most low-income students' families know this, probably better than high-income families do. I'm going to make this point in a second as well. So what do we have here? We have at Georgia State. By the way, their average SAT scores did not change. They did not go get better students. In fact, their average SAT score, they don't want to tell you this, it's about 10 points lower now than it was 10 years ago. Not better students, higher percentage of URM students, underrepresented minority students, no new funding from the state. In fact, funding has dropped. So it sounds like magic, right? It does sound like magic. It's not. What it is a 10-year change process that before we called it Guided Pathways is about 80% about guided pathways and about 20% about student financial stability, because they do that really well too. They had a 2-year pre-nursing program. They looked at the data and said, why do we have a 2-year pre-nursing program when we know after a year that these students aren't getting into nursing, right? That's a financial stability issue. You're not wasting 2 years to find out you're not getting into something. You can redirect yourself in another direction, right? So I think this story is obviously incredibly impressive. Here's the last thing I want you to do, is not think of this as a chart or data. These are students, right? What this means, their overall graduation went from 31 to 56. These numbers are a little old compared to that. So they improved their graduation rate by 25 points. So before, they had 4,000, it's about 18,000 students at Georgia State, about 4,000 new students a year. 10 years ago, if you started at Georgia State, about 1,200 of those 4,000 students would complete. Now it's 2,300. What does that mean? That's 1,100 students a year who entered that college who, if they'd entered 10 years ago, would not have met their goals, who today are meeting their goals. Over a decade, that's 11,000 students. Do the math for you. How many new students start at Moorpark a year? 4,000 or 5,000? Call it, it's almost the same numbers. Call it 4,000. Let's say you're a little better now than they are, right? Let's say you get 40% of them through to their goals. If you could make that 60, that's 800 students a year starting at Moorpark today that would not get through, that were you to have a 60% completion rate from everyone who started would get through. That's 8,000 students in a decade in your community whose lives have been improved for the better. Those are the stakes, and when this gets hard and you start talking about things you don't want to talk about and you're saying, why are we changing this? The possibility of this is why you're changing this, if you decide to do this, right? I think this is, to me, it's energizing and it's a little scary to know that the stakes are this high. We don't talk a lot about our effect on our students, and what this is telling us is we have a bigger effect than we thought they did. It was very easy, by the way, that went for 600 years. We didn't think about our effect on the students. We thought about the students. What are they doing? How do we get them more prepared? How do we make students college ready? There's a whole movement, I think it's a little hokey, because how do we make colleges student ready? It's a pretty powerful mindset, though. It's a shift in the way we think about things. It's not 180 degrees. And I think, as you said earlier, Dr. Sanchez, there's a lot of things that you've done on the path to this that we might be able to, Manuel said this too, to kind of put together into a more holistic approach that we would call guided pathways. All right. Now, yes? Yeah. So I'm not answering that question yet, but I'm going to, and I want to build up to it. So you've got this in your head. I want everyone else to be on their toes with it too. We're going to get to that. So yes, but not now. Like how I did that? That was very subtle. All right. Building urgency in the case for change. I'm going to do these pretty quickly because I want to get to the guided pathway stuff, and it's hot in here, and I'm going to need a break soon and pass out. All right, so this is a set of slides. I talked a little bit about this earlier, about economic mobility, and I will tell you that I grew up in East San Jose, and I had a lot of privilege granted to me. First of all, I was white. Second of all, I came from two college-going parents, right? And my community, although it was lower income, was kind of a college-going area, like the Silicon Valley area just kind of pushes this, right? But I came from the lowest income decile, right? So in my case, my family both went to college, did not relate into anything other than living in the lower class. Now, I'm talking about this because what we're going to talk about here is this notion about economic mobility and equity. It is absolutely true that higher education is about more than economic mobility. But, we did this earlier, what percentage of your students are here for the love of learning? It's not very high. And I would argue that 98% of your students are career focused. So this career versus transfer thing, it's harmful in a number of ways. Your students care about careers. Now, a sense of lifelong learning, a liberal arts education are two things we hold dear. I hold them dear too. I'm a social scientist, right? And I think the point here is not that we don't do those things, but that we do them in service of why the students are actually here to enter into the workforce. I am a huge fan of the notion that a series of liberal arts outcomes are in the end what's going to guide a graduate of our institutions through their career. Because we're going to train them for the first job, possibly, or they're going to enter the first job. They're going to change and elevate in their career. They need I don't know what they are here. I don't have to look, though. They were the 5 C's at my old college: critical thinking, computation, communication, citizenship, and creativity. That's what's going to carry them farther. So we don't need to stop doing those things. And I think we've created this false dichotomy between careerism and those 5 things. You know, we need those 5 things in every career that comes after this, right? So we need to do this. And we need to impress upon our students not only that they have to do this, but why. Why should you be doing this? Because, hey, that first job's really cool. You want to be a manager at some point? You want to run your own business? You're going to need more than just knowing what you need to do at the first level. That's where the liberal arts outcomes come in. But again, as I mentioned, it might be more important. But I will say this about economic mobility, that it is more important to those students who come from the lower half of the income spectrum, right? If you are poor, economic mobility matters a lot, especially because you're the ones taking out the student loans, right? If you're in the lower income strata, you're more likely to take out student loans. A lot of this stuff is even more real to you, okay? And so I mentioned this earlier, there's a correlation between race and income level. What we're talking about, whether you think equity is about race or income or both, I think it's both. Gender a little bit, although in community colleges that doesn't tend to be as much of a problem as it does some other places. Certainly as I look around this room, it's not a problem, except for the men. Might be a problem for us, but there's 2/3 of the people, as always, are women. By the way, when I was a VP at, no, I was dean at Skyline at this time, we had 16 people in the cabinet, all the deans and VPs. I was the only male. 15 women and me. That was a fun group, by the way, just so you know. Good times. All right. So this is actually, when I think of who works in this country on economic mobility, who are the real people who are down on the ground, grittily working on economic mobility, I think of course, Stanford, Brown, Harvard, Berkeley, MIT, and Cambridge, like those bastions of economic mobility. Of course they're not, right? I mean, it's actually part of the point here is that these are elite institutions, right? What I do think is interesting is there are researchers who are at these institutions are making these points about this. So what these folks did is, and these guys they're economists and they're largely data dorks, and if you go to this website, you're going to find a lot of really technical stuff. But they also produce PDFs and summaries and slides that are very cool, and they share them freely, just to kind of walk with what's the problem we're dealing with. So what do we have here? We have Harvard. Here's Harvard. And what you have across the bottom is the parent income quintile of students going to Harvard. So what does this say? It says that 70% of students going to Harvard come from parents who are in the top 20% of income in this country. Now, we probably knew that a little, right? 70% is pretty high, though. I mean, what's the American dream? Not that the private institutions are responsible for the American dream. American dream is that no matter which income quintile you're born into, you have an equal chance at achieving any given outcome. There's some slides later that say the American dream's broken. Clearly, at least at Harvard, it's pretty broken. I mean, 83%, almost 84% come from the top 2 income quintiles. One of the things here is that 15% of the students at Harvard come from the top 1%. So there are more students at Harvard whose parents are in the top 1% than in the bottom 50%. And it's not just Harvard. So now when we look at the Ivy Plus colleges, and I love this, so we have the Ivy colleges, and then we've added 4, Chicago, Stanford, MIT, Duke. Note that I said Stanford and MIT were researchers on the project, which is now we have a new category, it's the Ivy Plus, because we want to be there. My alma mater in there as well. So these 12 colleges, the Ivy Plus colleges of this country, theoretically the most elite universities, private universities in this country, 15% of the students at these 12 colleges are from the top 1%, 14% are from the bottom 50. So there are more students in these 12 institutions whose parents make over $750,000 a year than in the entire lower half of the income distribution. Now, maybe not, I was surprised by the magnitude of this. We kind of knew this sort of, but this is pretty stark. And what does it mean? Certainly these institutions are not helping anyone with economic mobility because they're not there, right? I mean, you're helping the rich stay rich, right? Now what's interesting about this, by the way, and I love this one, you're 77 times more likely to attend an elite private college if you're in the top 1% versus the bottom 20%. That's pretty far from the American dream, but so let's look at one other thing here. Let's look at 4 different colleges, just to kind of see a progression of who's serving more students equitably around the country. So let's look at, and this is not chosen because we're in California, Berkeley. So one of the elite public schools in the country, but it's a public school, right? It's supposed to be the people's university. And at Berkeley, it's better than Harvard, but not much better. You still got 55, and this actually did surprise me. I didn't realize it was quite this much. and we're talking 55% of the students from the upper income quintile at Berkeley. It's only when you start getting to the regional 4 years where you start seeing some equity, at least in access. Here's a college in New York, SUNY Stony Brook, just outside of New York City on Long Island. Chosen actually because it's close to Columbia, which is one of the other, there's a slide later that compares them. So the American dream would be flat across here. They're pretty close, right? They're actually serving a really interesting strata of students from this country. And by the way, I didn't pick this from California either. The researchers did. Here's a community college. Here's Glendale. Now you guys know as well as I do, I have to tell the people around the country this, Glendale is not exactly the poorest part of Los Angeles or LA or Southern California. I mean, it is a relatively middle class. It has, you know, like most places in California, there's an upper class, a middle class, and a lower class area. But this is not the low income part of California, right? Contra Costa or, you know, go to Merritt or Laney or Southwest, LA Southwest. But what do you see here? Here's where all the poor students are. The poor students are 60% of them from the two lowest income quintiles make up Glendale's student population, right? So the point here is you can like or not like economic mobility as a driver, but it's real. Because we are the section of higher education that is serving this group of students. The ones who need us to get that bridge to sustainability. One interesting, do I have the slide? Yeah, this slide's actually kind of interesting. So this compares Columbia and Stony Brook. What this line here is the probability that a student makes it from whatever income quintile they're in to the top. So note that that's not the only measure of mobility, right? Moving up a quintile or up 2 quintiles would be great. This is just, you know, one interesting layer. Because what this shows is, if you're at Columbia, it actually doesn't matter where you're from once you get in. They are equally successful at getting people into the top income quintile if you get in. This, by the way, slide has been used to talk when you talk about affirmative action. Well, apparently the problem isn't what happens after students from the lower income quintiles get in, it's getting in. Right? The other thing that's interesting here is Stony Brook is, yeah, it's not an Ivy League school, right? It's a regional 4-year school, but it's only about 7-8 points different, and it also brings students from all income quintiles in and gets them to the promised land, or at least one measure of the promised land. But they have how many more students coming from there? So these guys created what they called a mobility rate, which basically multiplied the percentage of students you had from the lowest quintile times your success rate at getting into the top. Just one measure, but it's interesting to look at where the colleges in the country land on this. So here's Columbia and Stony Brook. So here's the percentage of your parents in the bottom quintile. Here's your success rate at getting to the top. So here's the Ivy League schools. So what do you see here? You see the Ivy League schools do pretty well, between 40 and 65% of getting someone to the top income quintile, but they have no students, right? They don't have anyone there to do it. They're between 0 and like 6-7%. Add in the public flagships, the kind of elite public flagships, places like Berkeley, Michigan. I mean, Buffalo's not exactly the elite, but the SUNY system overall is fairly strong. You don't see much, again, in terms of access, except for in a place like New Mexico. And of course, those of you who know New Mexico, is because that state is like riddled with poverty throughout the state. There's very few high income anything in New Mexico. So part of this does have a little bit to do with where you live, right? But where are the community colleges? We're down here. So we're not as successful at getting students in, although any success here is good, but we have all these student places where we're getting 40-50% of our students from the bottom income quintile. The point of all of this is whether you came in thinking economic mobility matters for your students, it does. It does because we are the sector serving this student population, and for us, the stakes are higher because if you start off in the upper income quintile, it doesn't really matter what happens, right? I mean, this is, and I think, by the way, when you look at the top 10 schools in the country on this mobility rate, which these researchers created, what's interesting about these schools? These are the top 10 in the country. They're all public. And who do they serve, actually, on average? This is another thing about race in this country. If you think race isn't an issue in this country, they serve Latino students. They don't serve black students. Right? So the places where we do hit a relative home run, I think 8 of these 10 schools are HSIs. None of them serve over 10% of black students, right? And there's a chart on this, and that is just an observation. I mean, there's many reasons for that, but what I think and by the way, there's 2 community colleges on this list, Glendale and South Texas. So the point about all of this, and this is how I had to get to this in this other project without talking about guided pathways, is that this stuff matters more for our students than they do for Berkeley students. So we have this thing sometimes on our shoulder that we want to be like Berkeley. I'd argue strongly against trying to be like Berkeley, right? I love Berkeley. I know I went to Stanford and thinks I'm hammering Berkeley. It's fine. My VP went to Berkeley, so we have spirited conversations about that. But the point is, from an access standpoint and from a mobility standpoint, we are the far more important sector. It's a lot of pressure. It's not pressure we signed on for the most part, but it's here. It's who we serve, right? This is our student population. So, all right, so that gets us to what's our best chance here? What's our best chance for moving the needle? And I'm going to argue, I'm going to talk a lot about guided pathways today. Financial stability may come up for those of you who stay in the afternoon a little bit more. Let's talk about our students. Where are my advisors in the room? Right here. I'm back in a row. They're always together. Counselors, sorry, I'm in California. Sorry. 2 states I have to do that in, California and Washington. I have a rant on this, by the way. Advising is a function. It's not a person, right? So advising happens with all of you, right? The counselors nod their head most at this. And we have this, whatever your state I'm in, I have to be careful with the distinction. Counselors, advisors, we're talking about the role of helping students figure out what they need to do. Primarily in California, this is served through counselors, although not always. We do have some places in California that are using faculty advising models in tandem with counseling as well. All right, so how much time do you guys have with new students? So let me ask you this. If I'm a new student, if I'm coming from, I'm making this up, Moore Park High School. Is there a Moore Park High School? Sweet. You see how much research I do on this ahead of time? I was happy I knew I was in Moore Park. I mean, I was in 5 hotels and 5 nights last week. That was fun. All right, Moore Park High School, and I'm coming here there are many paths to Moore Park College. This is not the only one. It's now summer. I'm going to come next fall. Am I required to see a counselor? Not required. Okay, so this is not, by the way, this is not on counseling, by the way. Problem 1 is we know that the people who tend to ask for help are the ones who either need it the most, who are going to have the hardest time serving, or the ones who need it the least, right? When I was at Foothill as the VP, I asked my research, we had one of those swipe cards for a while. I don't know what happened to all these, but whenever anyone used student services, counseling, advising, tutoring, anything, we tracked it. And I asked my researcher, hey, what was the average GPA of students last quarter? Because Foothill was on quarters, which was fun. It's fine, except for the rest of the states on semesters. Of quarter of students who used any student service total more than twice. What do you think that GPA was? 371. Right? So what were we doing? We were helping B+ students become A- students, which, while not without value, all of those students were going to be successful anyway. Right? There was a bump at the bottom, the 0.0 students, who we required to see us because we put them on probation. Right? We're missing everyone in the middle. This is really important. Why is this really important? Think with me, here's a mental exercise. Let's rank your entering students from 100 as high down to 1 in terms of their probability of getting through here. I, by the way, would not only use math and English if I did that, as you might guess from earlier. The top 20 out of those 100, I call them the unicorns. They are the students who, no matter what you do, are going to complete at this college. You could take away their books, you could not show up in class, you could do whatever the hell you wanted to, and these 20 students would figure out a way around you to reach their goals, right? There are 20 of them. There never were more than 20. We have this thought in our head that at some point we had 75 of these. You're not Stanford, you never had 75 of these, right? You have 20, you're gonna have 20. Everyone wants these students. The issue is not how many of these students you have. You got about 20, okay? Come down to the bottom, ranked from 15 down to 1. And let's say, I don't think it's more than 15, it's probably not less than 10. There's 15 students who, no matter what you do, no more than one of them is going to complete by traditionally what we consider completion at the college. What do you have going on down here? Learning disabilities, diagnosed and undiagnosed, psychological issues, family issues, severe economic issues. There are a group of students for whom you're not going to get them to complete by what we classically consider completion. There's a whole debate about whether we're doing them a benefit or not by helping them run up student loan debt. I land on the access side of that debate. I want everyone to have the equal chance. But there's about 15 at the bottom. It doesn't actually matter what you do. No more than one's that are going to succeed. So if your overall completion plus transfer rate's around 40, as I said it was earlier, and you get 19 out of 20 at the top and 1 of 15 at the bottom, it means you're only getting 20 of the 65 in the middle through. that is where your leverage is. Your leverage is not at the top, it's not at the bottom. And most of our models of, this is not a hit on student services, by the way, this is just historically. Most of our models of drop-in serve the top and the bottom, right? So we're missing the entire group in the middle is the group for whom you have leverage, right? And we need to be careful that there aren't demographic differences between these three groups, so we're not giving up on the bottom group. When we've looked at this, the bottom group and the middle 60 tend to look similar demographically. The top group tends to look differently. Sometimes they're higher income. They tend to be more white, which is related with that. It has nothing to do with ability. It just happens to be, and in California, more Chinese and Japanese. I mean, we have to distinguish between Asian, especially in California, between Southeast Asian and Chinese and Japanese. It's all very different. But yeah, that top 20 does look a little different, but the bottom 80, if you will, on this mythical scale is basically the same. So the point here is, and keep this point in your head, when you think about the things we're doing, we're not designing things for the top 20 who are going to navigate whatever model you put in front of them, right? And may even be mad that you're making the model easier because they were the ones who navigated the old model fine. But they're going to be fine with a new model, right? And the bottom 15 aren't going to be the ones you address either, right? So new students, they come to us, and if you do get them, how long do you get them face-to-face? Wow, you guys are long here. 45 minutes, that's like the longest in the country. Most colleges, I mean, this is insane, right? That's the longest in the country, but 20, 30, even 45 minutes. So what you guys are supposed to do is in that 30 to 45 minutes, you're supposed to address their hopes and dreams, their educational histories to hear, how high school went, if they're reentry students, how that's going for them. What do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? What are these careers? Hey, what do you get on those assessment tests? Because you can't do any of that stuff if you don't want to do, you know, that all in 40, which is of course insane, right? So what we end up doing in the traditional model, called the cafeteria model by CCRC, is we say, don't worry about it, just go take some gen eds. And what does that look like? That looks like this, right? Just take some gen eds, it's all good. There's not a single person in this room who looks at this list and goes, I see what to do. And you work at the college. These are first-time in college students. These are students who don't have a background of navigating educational systems. And this isn't yours, by the way, although from the laughs, I'm guessing it could be. And by the way, you have all these acronyms, these things. I've worked in higher ed for 15 years now. I don't know what AAF and EGR are. What the hell's AAF? African American F, though. Now try the F. Like, oh, females, yeah. It's a class for African American females. That's a gen ed letters. Yeah, I mean, this stuff makes no sense. Like, letters by itself doesn't make any sense. Like, no one this is a college in Texas, by the way, pre-reform. So no one looks at this and gets any sense of what they're supposed to do. I am a social psychologist. We were talking earlier. Behavioral economists and social psychologists have dorky beer-fueled discussions about things. What do we argue about? We argue about a lot of things. What we don't argue about is how many things students, humans, by the way, not students, because students are in fact human, can reasonably make decisions between without getting paralyzed. You know roughly what that number is? It's between 3 and 7, depending on which researcher you listen to. I mean, psychologists tend to go more towards 7, economists say more towards 3. This is a little more than 3, a little more than 7. And by the way, think combinations now. You're talking about billions of combinations of courses here. Under the guise of this being easier for students, right? This is easier. Well, what we're learning is it's apparently not easier, right? So it's way too much choice. And what do students tell us? That they're lost and confused. I mean, I talk about Student Support Redefined, the study from California a lot, which interviewed 1,000 students throughout California about the process of completing and transferring, and they asked what would have helped you or what did help you. The top 2 factors that came back were directed and focused. Help me figure out what I want to do, and then help me figure out what I need to take to get there. Students tell us this, right? So they're telling us, basically, they're giving us the kind of mission for Guided Pathways. Okay, now we're going to do something a little fun. Anyone know what that is? Thank you. We got a Family Feud aficionado. We're going to play a game. I enjoy this a lot, by the way. Probably more than you do. All right. First question. Now, not only anyone can answer this. When new students meet with advisors, what exactly are they asking advisors? And so, hold on a second here. Let me get into this. Whoa, 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 whoa. All right. Hold on. Show question. Oh, I'm here. And now, because I've only done this twice, I don't know what the answers are, so I got to pull it up on here. You think I'm kidding? I have no idea what they are. I know what they are. I don't know what order they're in. Where is this? Here we go. All right, what do new students ask advisors? Go. What classes should I take? Hold on. Wow, you guys really know Family Feud. What courses should I take? What else? How long will it take? What should I do with my life? Translated, we're going to give you that one. Judges say, career options. What am I going to do with my life? How much money will I make? All right, I'm going to buzz that one just because I like the buzzer. That's close. How much will it cost? That's the flip side. That's why it wasn't really a buzzer. I just like doing that occasionally because if you get them all right, it's boring. How much will it cost? Ah, you guys are good at this. Not all of, number 6 is not for all of them. It's a subset of the students. And I'll give you this one because this is, actually, I want one more guess so I can buzz something. I just set that up. What services are there? See, I'm going to buzz that, although that's good. I lost my mouse. Will my credits transfer? Yeah. These sound about right? All right. So ask yourself this question. By the way, I think these are great questions students are asking. Right? And then, by the way, who are my psychology instructors in the room? Oh, that's like there's a group right there. I could have been you if I'd taken that part-time psychology job 20 years ago. Yeah, you were on that committee. No. You guys offered me sections of part-time. I didn't take them. Let's be clear. I was successful in that search. Hold on a second here. I didn't say I failed at it. I failed organic chemistry. That was a different story. Okay. So if I'm going to take students out of a psych class, I pick psych because it's A, my discipline, and B, it kind of portrays the classic gen ed problem we have, right? So I'm going to take 10 students out of a psych class who've been here for 3 semesters. I'm going to use this group for a couple things. First thing I'm going to do, though, is ask them these questions. And ask them, hey, how do you feel like you either at any point early on or now have good answers to these questions? How many of those students do you think are going to answer positively? Right. Right? So 1, 2, or 3. So this, by the way, is exactly what happens, is very few students have any idea what the answers to these questions are. Right? Now, I'm not blaming one person at the college or even the college for this. This is the nature of how colleges have operated for 6 centuries. Right? This is a 6-century-long path we're on. Goes all the way, historians can argue with me about whether it's Edinburgh, Oxford, or the monasteries, some combination of those. And who went to school then, by the way? Who went to university? Rich white kids who are the elite members of the ruling class. So, and not just kids, right? And so what that was it was a model for the elite to stay elite. Didn't matter how long it took. Didn't matter what you did. You were still a member of the ruling class. Right? What do we do in America in the 20th century? You go forward 550 years, it's still exactly the same. Mid-20th century in America, we democratized higher education with 2 things. What were they? The GI Bill. Number 1 thing was the GI Bill. Not necessarily equitably early on, but it got there. The GI Bill brings a lot of people into higher ed who never would have been there before, which caused the second thing, community colleges. Right? Didn't have spots for all. We opened the doors. I think it was Truman who was the GI Bill Truman, or was it still Eisenhower? All of a sudden it was, wait a minute, this was a good idea. We have no spots for these students. It was a great idea, though. So if you know, community colleges, a lot of them evolved or grew or were born in the 50s and 60s. But the model stayed the same. This model of university, of wandering and finding yourself, which we hold so dear, works really well still if you have infinite amounts of time and resources. Doesn't work very well for the folks we open the door to. Right, who haven't navigated educational institutions, who need a clearer path from a financial and economic standpoint, and also just from a moving through the institution standpoint. Okay, so let me ask you one other question. Is there another type of higher ed institution that has really good answers to these questions? That's stealing your students left and right? For profit. Like, they're not necessarily technical trade schools, although those too, but let's even throw in National and Phoenix in the for-profit type schools here. Now, some of you may have taught, I don't think most for-profit universities are not out only to take students' money and financial aid money from the state. There can be good people working in these colleges. However, having said that, their outcomes are not good. right? From an outcome standpoint, you're talking about colleges whose average rates of transfer and completion are lower than ours, which I have an ethical issue with, and we can talk about that at some time. But I'm actually more interested in why they're stealing your students. Why? Because you clear path, right? First thing there, clear path. By the way, what was that? They guarantee jobs. So they start with number one. Yeah, they can't do that, you're right. And it's especially illegal because they're not actually delivering on that promise. But yeah, what does all their marketing show? It shows jobs. Starts with jobs. The clear path thing is big though. You can't go to national and take Psych 1 unless Psych 1's on your pathway and they told you to take it in what order, right? They tell you exactly what to take in what order. They, by the way, tell you it won't take very long. They're lying about that, but they tell you it's not going to take very long, right? In the perfect world. So they literally have built an entire marketing platform on the first 5 of these 6. The 6th one they can't touch because they're in a lot of trouble on the 6th one because most of their stuff is not transferable and or have agreements. So they're actually doing students a huge disservice. So what's interesting though is people say, yeah, those for-profits do great marketing. They do marketing, but it's what they market. They're marketing a value proposition to the students, and our students are flocking to them. By the way, what type of students flock to for-profits more? Low-income students and students of color, right? So the very students who need us to be better, we can do all of this, by the way, at 1/10 the cost. It does suggest a marketing slogan to me, which you may not want to use because it's got something to work out. Fail with us, it's cheaper. He says, no, we're not going to do that. That's not. By the way, someday I hope to go back to a college and they're using that, but I don't think that's going to happen. But there's some truth to that in the insanity of its premise, right? Students would be much better off not succeeding from here than they would from Phoenix. 10 times the student loans, right? Pell used up. I mean, they'd be much better off here. So these are all important. We're going to let's talk about returning students for a second. What do they ask? They ask things like, how far am I toward completing my program? How much more do I have to pay? What do I need to take next term? What will my schedule be? Before you think, by the way, and this is something we do in the back of our heads, sometimes in the front of our heads, very rarely is it stated out loud. Before you think students should know this, because we do this, right? We said, well, we figured it out. By the way, anytime a sentence starts with, well, when I was in school, or when we were in school, there's about a 90% chance that what comes after that is not going to be helpful from an equity standpoint, just so you know. Very rare. It does happen occasionally. So if you think these 2 questions are things students should know, consider this exercise. My friends at Miami-Dade College, one of our early completion by design colleges, they were in their first, I said the first year was the Wild West. They were really fighting about whether they wanted to go down this path of guided pathways or not. Like half of their faculty wanted to, half didn't. And the dominant paradigm of those who didn't said, well, shouldn't they just be able to figure this out? Isn't it clear to students? And so we found out later that it happened to be their faculty union president who suggested the following exercise. They had 28 faculty in a room from their 28 largest departments. Miami-Dade's huge, 100,000 undergrads. Yeah, it's over 7 colleges, the largest undergrad institution in the country. They had 28 faculty from the 28 largest departments. They asked the biology faculty to leave the room. Not sure why her, or him. And they asked the other 27 faculty to design the ideal 2-year pathway to graduate with an AS degree in biology and transfer with junior standing and a major to Florida International University, which accepts about 70% of their transfer students. They closed the doors. I picture Game of Thrones, doors closing, right? Gave them 3 hours, and when the dungeon doors opened, they gave them a computer, the catalog, and the schedule. 3 hours later, when the door opened, the epiphany had happened at Miami-Dade College among the faculty because they couldn't do it. They could not do the task that we are preachy and condescending about our first time in college students not being able to do. Pause on that for a second. They work at the college. They have mostly PhDs, maybe that as someone who has a PhD, that could be the problem, but they have mostly PhDs. They've been at the college an average of 12 to 15 years. They have hundreds of years of higher education experience. Yeah, they're not advisors or counselors. But if they can't do it, why do we think that our students are going to be able to do it? The English faculty in the room was awesome. The English faculty said, you know what I would have done? I would have had him change his major to English, so I actually could have helped him. So it is that confusing. And if you don't think it's that confusing, try a second thing, which is pull some transcripts of students who've been here for 3 semesters or 4 semesters and try to figure out what the hell they're doing. You won't be able to unless they're in a cohort-based program, like nursing, like auto tech, going to come right back to this in a second. So our students are that lost. All right, one more Family Feud. We'll take a break after this. All right, we got one more of these. There are two groups of students, by the way, who are highly successful on your campus under the traditional model. Before we go to Guided Pathways, one of them I just mentioned, cohort-based career technical students. And by the way, I immediately take nursing off the table here, because while I love nursing, because it's selective, it doesn't help us in this argument very much, because anyone can always say back to the nursing, yeah, you just took all the best students, right? Which, by the way, devalues a lot of what nursing programs do to help students get through. But let's hold that, because you have probably 20 other cohort-based CTE programs. Any faculty from those in the room here, from those other cohort-based CTE programs? Yeah, what do you teach, ma'am? Child development. Child development's an interesting one. What's the success rate of the cohort side of child development, overall-ish? Child development's a funky one, right? Because you got a lot of drop-in, drop-out type things. I think there's parts of child development that are cohort-based, kind of like auto tech, right? There are parts of auto tech that are cohort-based, and there's parts where you come in and do one thing. Anyone in a full, like, 2-year program, cohort CT program right here? They're all teaching right now, by the way. So nursing being one. I don't want to use nursing. I said rad tech. Anyone from rad tech in the room? You know what the success rate of your rad tech students is, completion rate? 85, 90, 95%. It's not just allied health, by the way. It is programs like welding, like mechatronics, like business office technology, tend to have 65 to 85 to 95% completion rates. Okay, that's one group. I'm about to ask why they're so successful, but there's a second group who could not be more different than the first group. They are classically gen ed, exclusively pre-transfer students who are 18 to 21 years old, who also double or triple the success rate of the rest of your students. You want to know who that group is? Athletes. Community college athletes are a fascinating group. Now, I know men's football and men's basketball programs in Division I get a lot of flack for academics, right? That does happen. Although, anyone know the NCAA graduation rate of all programs in the country? It's about 80. It's higher than the average graduation rate of university students. So this athlete thing is not, I mean, men's basketball, men's football at Texas, I mean, there are places this is a problem. We're not talking about, though, we're talking about community college athletics. Community college athletes, is any of the coaches in the room right now? What do you coach? What's the average transfer rate of your athletes? Ish. What was that? Into the 90s. So that's even higher than most athletics programs. Okay, so here's the question, the last game before the break. Why are these two groups of students so successful? Hold on. We're back. Why are community college athletes and cohort-based CTE students, I thought I changed that question, so successful? This is both. Have to be full-time. Hold on, now I gotta look at this again. All right, I'm gonna buzz that, we'll come back to it. Just because I love that, that's my favorite part of all this. No, you're right, though, it's close to another one. She's looking at me like, dude, I wanna recount. All right, what's one right there? Okay, so this one I love. A ticking time clock. Now, we would think about this with athletes, right? You got 5 years to play for, but it's true of your cohort-based. There you go. See, all right. I know. You're able to negotiate. This is true for cohort-based CTE students, too, though, right? The programs are time delimited. They want to get in the workforce right there in the back. A dedicated counselor. Mandatory support, right? This one is interesting because athletes can't work. Cohort-based CTE students work a lot on average. So there's an interesting one there. I'm not going to buzz that. Sure I am. Why not? Thank you. What are some other ones? They work together in teams. They have what we call peer support. They have clear eligibility requirements. That's on here. Where is that? Yeah, that's okay. We're going to put that down. Specific outcome goals. Say more about that.
Well, they know from the moment walking in if their goal is moving forward.
Motivation. This is really important because they're both highly motivated by completely different things. One's motivated by being ready for the job and making money. The other's motivated because they want to play at the four-year school, right? So apparently it's actually not what you're motivated by that matters. It's motivated. They're both highly motivated. What else? A program of study. They have a clear sequence of courses to take on the CTE side, the cohort-based CTE side. And the athletes, I know this from history, doesn't look like I would know this, but I know this from history, you're told exactly what to take in what order, right? The athletic counselor sits you down and says, oh, you want to get out of here in 2 years? Take these, right? So they're not lost either. Neither of these groups are lost. There's two more here. You guys are great at this. I thought I heard someone say one of them's a person. That's a big hint. Coach. The chair of the program or the coach. So this is a fascinating person and a role that is being played at the college for these students. It is someone whose job it is to monitor student progress and make sure no one falls through the cracks. All of his coaches, there's never been an athlete who's fallen through the cracks academically without knowing they were in trouble first. The same thing is true in auto tech. The same thing is true in welding. The same thing is true in mechatronics, because you have a chair, usually a faculty member in this case, who's basically saying, hey, you're in trouble, get the support. So these are interesting. They are institutional agents invested in the student's success. So now come back to our psych students. We see our psych students like in a lecture, right, 3 days a week, and then they're gone. Like those students could be gone next semester. We'd never know it. No one at the college would know that unless they were an athlete or in a special program. They're invisible to us as students with their progress. So they can fall through the cracks, and frankly, they do a lot. What's the last one? This one's kind of funny, but it's actually not in the end. Uniforms. What do I mean by uniforms? It's not necessarily the uniform itself. It's a sense of purpose and identity. So this goes with the peer support. By the way, my joke on the peer support for athletes is if you're the starting quarterback on the football team, 98 of the other 99 guys on your team want you to succeed. The other guy's the backup quarterback. He'd like you to fail miserably, unless he's really supportive. So these are really interesting reasons that both of these groups are highly successful. Again, when was the last time someone on your women's volleyball team was also in your Surge Tech program? Doesn't happen. There's no overlap between these two student populations. One tends to be younger, one tends to be a little older, and there's almost no parallel in the programs they're moving through, right? Because very few students are moving through, athletes are going through cohort-based CTE programs. But these are the things that at the end of the day, we've found to be highly successful. All right, here's what we're gonna do. Take about 15 minutes, I'm gonna translate all of what we've kind of just worked up to into the Guided Pathways movement and the big ideas, and then we're gonna open it up for about 30 minutes of your questions. I also wrote a paper called Guided Pathways Demystified that walks through the top 10 questions we heard in the field, Kay and Davis and me and Gretchen for about 5 years. I actually ran through them in a blog series and turned them into a paper. So I have those questions too. I can also send you a link to the paper. It's not trying to necessarily convince people you should do Guided Pathways, but they're questions that are good questions that people ask, like what about free choice? What about liberal arts? What about control over what I teach? What about students making career decisions? So we'll get into some of that. If you have direct questions, I have them in the background, but I'd rather just have questions from you directly. So we have these ideas, what we think helps students. We saw two types of students that they help. By the way, someone came up to me in a break and said, we also do that for veteran students. And that's a group, by the way, who has a huge challenge reintegrating back into the population of higher education. And with the support that we give them, they do fairly well. It's not perfect, but we have to do these things for them too. So, and by the way, how many of you went to grad school? See? How many of you showed up at grad school and they said, just take some courses, we'll figure this out later? There's usually one hand. Where is it? What was the area? Germany. Well, Germany, which is like the opposite of what you would think of Germany. Most of us go to grad school, they say, here's what you're taking, in what order. So where we do, by the way, we do it with honors students too. Grad students, honors students, athletes, cohort-based CTE students, all groups that have very high success rates. Okay, so where does this take us? It takes us to look at what we used to do, what my friends at CCRC call the cafeteria college, right? The kind of pick and choose, paths to student goals are unclear, right? We talked about if you take 10 students out of, actually, let's try this exercise. Take 10 students out of that same psych class that have been here for 3 semesters, buy them lunch, buy them some pizza. So you're doing some focus groups, always a good idea. 2 key questions. 1, ask them, so how far are you along towards, as a percentage of 100, how complete are you in your program here at Moore Park? How many of those 10 students in psych do you think in a psych class, because they're not in psych, they're in a psych class, do you think know the answer to that question? So I've asked this question, this is my favorite survey question of all time, because I've asked this now to like 15,000 people across the country, and I've never heard any more than maybe 15 people say a number more than 2, right? The dominant response is 2 or 1. Now, remember, these aren't cohort-based CTE students, these aren't athletes, these are random psych students. By the way, when you do this, the answer is about 1.5. Have any idea how far they are along towards the degree. Now ask them a second question, even better. What do you still have to take to finish? The number drops below 1, right? So this is clearly a problem. So yeah, you guys have a degree audit thing, right? We all have degree audit. Just pause for a second on degree audit. Just pause for a degree audit. What does degree audit tell you? It tells you that no human being can look at a transcript and actually figure out what a student has done or is trying to do or what they need to do to get there. We need computer software and algorithm to figure it out for us, and by then it's still not clear. Right? That's what most degree audit is. As a theory, it's crazy, because the problem is we're modeling chaos, right? You're modeling chaos. The only way we're able to do it is if a student does happen to sit down with a counselor, have enough time for the counselor to do the divining rod sleuthing about how what they've done meets with the... Now, it's getting better in California a little bit because of the ADTs, right? The ADTs have helped with maybe half the problem for where we have them. We're getting some winces, maybe it's less than half. The idea of what are the discipline courses that they'll take, right? Doesn't help on the gen ed side as much still, right? That's part of the guided pathways movements to combine those. All right, but the paths are relatively unclear. Okay, intake sorts and diverts students. What does this mean? What do we do at intake? We test students in the 2 subjects they were most likely to hate in high school and tell them, by the way, that, well, you're right about one thing. You were worried if you were college material. You're not. You're not college material. Let's be honest here. You're not college material. And by the way, if we're really honest with them, we tell them, and you're never getting there, mostly, because 80% of you won't come back, right, when we throw you into Dev Ed. Not Dev Ed Math and English faculty's fault, by the way. Hold the thought on that. This is not about Dev Ed Math and English faculty. We're going to talk in a second about the structures we're seeing around the country that work at a much greater rate than what we've done historically. But the point here is not necessarily about Dev Ed Math and English. It's that they're not here to do math and English, certainly Dev Ed Math and English. That's the diverting part. The sorting part, by the way, and one of my favorite predictions I made, I've probably made 20 predictions that didn't come true, but I'm going to go with the one that I did predict, which was Compass going away. I said about 5 years ago, these tests have a half-life that's somewhere in the next 2 to 5 years. They're all going away. Why? Because if you've read were you guys at Compass School when it went away? You guys were AccuPlacer? So you wouldn't have read this. Oh, you're neither. Even more fun. Okay, cool. It's fine. The test doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the test is. When Compass went away, they sent out this press release that basically says, by the way, we've been faithfully serving you, community colleges, for the last 40 years, but our services are no longer needed. Why? Because we're seeing so many alternate models of extreme acceleration and co-rec models. Things like in California, the California Acceleration Project, the Baltimore County Accelerated Learning Project, StatWay, QuantWay, MathWays, the co-rec models in Tennessee and Hawaii, which are putting students directly into transfer level math and English courses and supporting them with a 2 or 3 unit class around it. What's fascinating to me about that whole range of things I just rattled off like this, they all have roughly the same outcome, which has nothing to do with that. I just clicked at the wrong time. Which is that about 60% of students pass the transfer level math or English course in their first year. 60 of those who start. Versus what we've done historically with our models, which is about 20% in 2 years. So interestingly, it's not whether it's StatWay, MathWay, QuantWay, CAP, or Baltimore County, it's that we've fundamentally changed the model and we don't have so many levels, right? It doesn't work for everyone, to be clear. The Tennessee model, Tennessee's the kind of the national model that's gone the farthest. In fall of 2015, every entering student in the state of Tennessee, 2-year or 4-year, went directly into a transfer level math or English course. Now, there was a required co-requisite course around that course of 1, 2, or 3 units based on where they would have tested. Lower they would have tested, the more units were required. The other flip side on math is that 80% of those students went into quantitative reasoning or statistics, based on the idea that only 20% of the students actually need the algebra sequence leading to STEM. The guy who runs this project, which is an awesome story on the side, he's a British mathematician in Tennessee. cool accent, by the way, after 10 years of his living in Tennessee. His name's Tristan Denley, and he said, look, I'm a mathematician. I will tell you that the reason we require most of our students in higher ed to do algebra and the algebra sequence is so they can teach it to their kids when we visit the same sequence on them 20 years later. Now, this is controversial in the math field, right? There are some people who believe that everyone needs the algebra sequence. I'm okay with that. I do, by the way, I am fairly swayed by those who've studied industry and what math is needed in the real world, right? And yeah, if you're in STEM, you absolutely need the math and the algebra to calculus sequence. If you're in a couple fields in psychology, a couple fields in business, mosquito in my ear there, a couple fields in business, yeah, that algebra sequence is really important. But the folks who study the workforce, my favorite study comes out of Georgetown, said about 80% of the jobs that require higher education degrees in this country use the math that's in a quantitative reasoning or a statistics sequence, not algebra. Now, 10 years ago, I would say that 3/4 of folks in math departments disagreed with this approach. They liked the algebra approach. I got to tell you, it's really shifted around the country to maybe 1/4 still disliking it, 3/4 the other way. I think this is progress because we didn't intend it to, but has been a barrier for so many of our students. English has been somewhat of a barrier, and we're seeing some acceleration models in English work really well too, not as much as math historically. I don't blame the math faculty, this was the system. When you assume everyone has to go through algebra, which by the way, the only reason algebra exists is on a stepping stone to first quarter calculus, right? Algebra exists to prepare you for calculus. Most of our students don't need calculus, right? So this is part of this movement here. We don't talk about this as much on this set of guided pathways work because there's been a national movement on this for a decade, Achieving the Dream, all of the stuff that's been going on, have been focusing on this issue. But I do think, I will tell you this, we live, and this is a political thing, I don't get into politics much, I'm just noting a correlation as I travel around the country. The more blue the state, the more bottom up it tends to be in higher education. The more red the state, the more top down it is. So where you see these things having happened at scale are in red states where they don't mind telling higher education what to do. Now that may be a good or, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I actually tend to be more on the blue state side of this. But places like Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee and Indiana and Florida tend to be the ones who've done more of these things at scale. But I will tell you this, even in the bluest states in the country, and I work in the two that are the most bottom up in community colleges, Michigan and California. Michigan's actually even more bottom up than California, which is even surprising. This is going to be legislated within the next 5 to 7 years. And I think it could be 2 to 7 years. When some legislator goes, even in California, let me get this straight. You guys have been doing things the same way for 3 decades, getting the exact same outcomes where 20% of the students who start down here finish over a long period of time. There's another way of doing this that gets 2 to 3 times as many students through in half the time, and you're doing it the old way still? I don't think so. It will happen in California, probably California and Michigan last. It's already happened in about 10 states. And the problem with letting legislators take care of it is, as you may know, legislators are not good at nuance, right? They're good at blunt instruments. And so they screw things up in the legislation like they did in Florida, right? Where at the last second, they had this whole DevEd reform in Florida that was well thought out. And then some legislator literally at 11:30 the night the bill went through slid in, oh, and by the way, all DevEd is optional. Which, by the way, there was a way to do that that would have been okay. Like the Tennessee one, it's not only optional, it's like not possible. But they didn't put any of the things that Tennessee put in, like you need this 1, 2, or 3 unit class, you need to assess students, you need to figure out how to support them. So the last second in Florida, they had all these students. And so the other irony of what happens when you do that, and weren't you one of the colleges who did self-placement for a while? You still do self-placement. What I remember, it was you guys in American River for a long time, right? So there was one up north. What I remember someone telling me from this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that students actually tend to underplace themselves in math and overplace themselves in English. Is that still roughly true? Yeah, so this is an interesting model, right? And by the way, what I used to say about self-placement when I saw the data is, well, it works about the same as everything else. At least they're not going through testing process. I mean, math and English faculty may need to do more to figure out, like, kind of on a standpoint of where students are. Not sure the test did that anyway. Point here being, I do think there's a period of time we have left on this, and I have to say I do think it's progress. Because I think the fact that many of our students aren't getting out of these sequences, if we can fix that with a type of math that is more relevant to what they're doing in the real world, who is this going to help most? It's going to help low-income students and students of color again. Right? It's not dumbing down the curriculum, it's a different curriculum. Right? I know there's, like, the CSU has gone back and forth on this. A lot of this has to do with what your transfer institutions will take, by the way. right? And CSU's gone on this, like, I mean, Statway, Quantway has been trying to deal with this for years. I just got an email that says they're back saying no again for a while. So we have to work those things out. You can't in good conscience put someone through a transfer statistics course if they're a transfer student and Channel Islands and Northridge aren't taking it. That problem has to be solved first. But I think what I'm saying to you is my guess is we're 3 to 5 years from that problem being completely solved, whether you like it or not. So intake is also, though, about getting students information about programs. Right, we're going to come back to that. Students' progress isn't monitored. So aside from those special groups, the only 2 times you communicate to students about their progress towards the degree are at graduation, you're eligible, or when we're putting some of them on probation. That's it. No other point do they get any feedback on their progress towards the degree. Now, you give them grades, but that's feedback on what happens in a course, not, and I can show you any, I don't even have to go find, if I pull 10 transcripts randomly, we'll find some that show you grades don't tell you much, right? What you need to know is how students are progressing towards the degree. And the final one is that the learning outcomes aren't defined and assessed across programs. This is really a setup for the flip side of this. What this means is we are highly focused on courses and not very highly focused on gen ed or program outcomes, except for in cohort-based CTE programs, right, where we're very focused on them. But the idea here is that, I mean, the SLO movement, I have a whole rant on the SLO movement that I'm going to shelve because we had it in our power to do this right. And I'm going to say, ACCJC, if you're on there, you guys screwed this up because they made it so that we had to do the wrong thing and not the right thing in reporting. The right thing would have been really focusing on the student learning, how to improve it, professional development around that, how do we set up cultures where people talk to each other about learning outcomes, all the things that we wanted to do with this movement, that when you had to put them in checkboxes and spreadsheets for ACCJC, didn't get recognized, so we didn't do them, right? So. And the interesting thing about that, by the way, is when you talk to folks who are accreditors, they want the same things we want. What they tend not to understand is the relationship between the things they make us do as requirements and how that affects cultures and the things we actually do, right? So having said all that, there's still a shift that needs to happen here more towards, interestingly, those liberal arts outcomes we hold so dear. When you go to employers, by the way, and we've done this, every college does an employer survey. Like you do your employer survey, it says, hey, how are our graduates doing in the workforce, right? Not just associate programs, bachelor's, master's, doctorates. So that nearly always when we do these, whatever college or university does this, they say, we love your graduates. If you press them, what are the 2 or 3 things they struggle with the most? What are they every time? Communication/writing. Say more about soft skills. What are soft skills? Working in groups, communication. Yeah, what else? Critical thinking. Someone said that. That's usually number 1, by the way. Critical thinking / problem solving. Computation in the real world. Grit. Things like some of the, if they get to the non-cognitives, I'm really happy. They don't usually do that as often. But they actually tell us the very things that we say hold the heart of a liberal arts education. Critical thinking, communication, computation, citizenship, creativity. So this is not to say we're failing at those things, but we don't actually, for the most part, think deeply about how we're developing and measuring those things. We assume it's happening by osmosis through courses. Somehow, additively, we get to critical thinking, right? And I think part of this Guided Pathways movement, ironically, although it seems more about structure, is about structuring how we develop these things as well. So course learning outcomes matter, but these program and institutional, these gen ed learning outcomes, if you want to call them that, they may be in the end what helps students continue down their career paths further. So that's kind of where things are now. And this is all the bad things that happen. We're going to get through those. They're red, so you can see they're bad. That's why CCRC, very clear color coding. Here's a Guided Pathways college. Clear roadmaps to student goals. Intakes redesign is an on-ramp. We closely track progress. And these outcomes or assessments are aligned across programs. Okay, so these are the 4 big ideas. We translate them into a slide I like better next, which is this slide. So we created this slide for the national project, and I think it really is helpful to say, what is the Guided Pathways movement? Up here, it's got the 4 big ideas. Clarify the paths. Math all programs that include features that clarify paths such as outcomes, course sequences, and progress milestones. What do I need to take to get to where I want to go? Paths are more clear. Help students get on a path. Require supports that help students get the best start, including first-year experiences, integrated academic support, and this is, by the way, where DevEd reform lands. The notion of doing math and English maybe differently. Help students stay on the path. Keep students on track with support such as intrusive advising and systems for tracking progress, so that everyone has that same feeling as the athlete or the surge tech or the veteran does in how they're monitored and supported at the college. And finally, ensure that they're learning. And this is both at the course level and reaching those kind of institutional learning outcomes, those gen outcomes we talk about. I'm going to make some points in here for a second. What does it require, the planning side of this? And this is where you guys are now. Are we going to go down this path? Is Moorpark going to take this on? It's large-scale transformational change. This is not big, small C change. This is big C. We're not attacking. We're trying to evolve a system that's been doing things the same way for a very long time, right? And it requires leadership, a commitment to looking at data, and we need to be also sure where we are. And in this afternoon, some of you who are coming this afternoon, CCRC and NCII created a scale of adoption tool for guided pathways that looks at these 4 big buckets and looks at 4 or 5 items in each of them to see, so you can look at, hey, where's Moorpark on this now? Everyone is doing some things on each of these big ideas. The question is for how many students and how are they tied together? We'll help you walk through that. You got to understand where you are to know where you might want to go. And then this is a big one. If you're going to do this, this is not something you're going to do in 6 months or 3 months or a year. That Georgia State story from earlier was a 10-year to 15-year story. They're not done, by the way. They're still evolving. Valencia on the community college side, the first winner of the Aspen Prize, is one of the most forward-thinking, innovative colleges I've met. They have a 65% completion plus transfer rate. And they're, by the way, a 50,000 student college who serves a low-income population just like us. Now, Florida has a couple of advantages because they're one of maybe 2 states with good transfer policy, maybe 3, where they have common course numbering, common articulation, all those things that we keep trying in California and going back on. And I have so many rants on, yeah, I know, yeah. By the way, I worked, that was funny. The comment, by the way, we got to try that in our own district first before we're going around the state. I like that one because I worked in Foothill De Anza, 2 college district, where 2 different math sequences at the time I was there, and there were courses that didn't articulate within the same district. Yeah, then I went to San Mateo, where I was at Skyline, San Mateo. Yeah, so we have this problem. You guys know this problem, right? This is a long-term deal, and you can't think. One of our friends in North Carolina, Ed Bowling, who ran CBD for North Carolina, said, "This is not something you're doing; it's something you're becoming." Sounds new agey. We're Californians. We can live with that. But this is something you're becoming. It's a movement. It's not an initiative. It's not an acronym. One of the 10 questions, by the way, I don't remember if this is in the first 10. I have a second 10 questions. Is, shouldn't I just wait this out like every other educational fad I've heard about for the last 20 years? I love that question, right? Because my answer to that question was, yeah, I mean, you got to remember, these people who asked this question have largely been right. Because we've never changed anything at scale, right? We've innovated on the margins a little bit, but all these projects have never produced the type of large-scale change. So it's up to us to do that with this one. It's a really good question to put on the table. One of the other things we're going to do this afternoon, just as a preview, by the way, and I thought this was the hokiest exercise when we did it on the national project. It's called a pre-mortem analysis. What you do is you try to figure out if this type of movement was going to fail at your college, why would it fail? You list the 5 reasons, which of course sets a platform for what you have to do about those things if you want this to succeed. We'll be doing that this afternoon too. I thought it was really cheesy when we did this. I'm like, this isn't going to work. People loved it. These 30 colleges who went through this project said it was one of the most important moments for them because it forced them to reflect on why stuff doesn't work at their college and to try to really move it forward. Everything from leadership not being aligned with faculty to student services not being aligned to instruction to never sticking with anything to never resourcing. I mean, you'll come up with your own reasons, but this is a really interesting thing to go about this. So let's tell a couple of stories and we'll open up for questions on helping clarify the path, helping students get on the path, helping stay on the path. I promised the pre-nursing rant. And now it becomes pre-nursing and you. Okay, how many students are in your nursing program here at Moorpark? A year, 140? Starting twice a year or that's once a year? Once a year, 145 start? So twice. 145 total though, right? All right. So call it 150 for the sake of rounding. So you have 150 students who are in the nursing program here at Moorpark. How many students do you think are pre-nursing or consider themselves pre-nursing here at Moorpark? By the way, this is another one of my favorite questions because what happens every time I do this is all of them is a very common response. Thousands is the next most common, but what people actually do when forced to do a number, they do something really interesting. It's really consistent. They multiply the number that's in the program by 10. What'd you say? Someone say 1,500? Yeah, so that'd be 1,500 here. Interestingly, we've looked at this at a couple colleges. The 10 times multiplier is about right most places. So there's a college in Ohio, Stark State College. has 2 cohorts of 80, so 160 students a year. This is in, now, showing the things I get myself in trouble with when I'm in various places that I don't know. I used to say it's in Akron, Ohio. Is anyone from Ohio here? Now why, so you tell me, I thought Akron was the place you'd want to be from because that's where LeBron James is from. But apparently they're in Canton, Ohio, right? Which is a big difference. And I didn't know this, so I got myself in trouble saying they're from Akron. They're from Canton, Ohio. Pro Football Hall of Fame, maybe that's why. I think it's an anti-Akron thing more than it's a pro-Canton thing, but that's a whole other story. By the way, I was in Ohio, the other Ohio story quickly, is I was in Columbus doing the whole like flagship thing. And I said, you know, well, there's some elite flagships like Michigan that have that happened like 20 times to that. And it was one of those things where as the words came out of my mouth, I'm like, this is gonna be fun. The groaning and the booing was like, because Ohio State hates Michigan. And I will say this, though. We're from California, so I can look at both of their completion rates and tell you that Michigan's is about 85%, and Ohio State's about 65%. So from a completion rate standpoint, one of them is very elite. The other is relatively elite. So, you know, if any of you went to either of those schools, send your mail to Emmanuel, because that's, I don't want to get... He thought he was in the back there, so he's hiding. All right, so at Stark State, 160 people in the program. So they measured, they actually had their institutional research say, hey, how many students are actually pre-nursing with a behavioral profile of what pre-nursing would look like? It was 1,700. Again, almost the 10-to-1 ratio, 11-to-1 ratio. So then the question is, of course, what do you do with the other 1,400 who don't get in? Let me ask that question of you. What do you as a college do for the 1,400? This mosquito's killing me. I'm getting buzzed. It's a gnat? Cool. Maybe the product I used was a little off this morning. The JW downtown is a little rough. It's upgraded there, by the way. I don't think I lived that way. I was in the courtyard. So what do you do for the other 1,400? But what do you do? If they come to you and you try to help them, right? The problem is not a lot of them do that, right? So, and it's not to say that I sat Emmanuel down and I said, Emmanuel, I see that you're pre-nursing here at Moore Park College, and that you have a 2.3, not that he would ever have a 2.3 GPA, but just work with me for a second. No one sat your students down and said, hey, Emmanuel, I see you got a 2.3 GPA, and you're trying to get into nursing. Good job, you're on the path, you're absolutely gonna get in, just keep at it. Because that would be morally bankrupt. Now the question you have to ask yourselves is, and this is a hard question, how less morally bankrupt is it to know that there are 1,400 students, half of whom are never getting into your nursing program at least, probably 2/3 of whom, who are invisibly taking courses and manually going on their way, running loan debt, and no one's intervening, right? It's not about the counselors, because if you don't require counseling, no one has a chance to do this. So here's what Stark State did. Now, I think these are really important ideas. I'm a big fan of the Guided Pathways movement, right? I'm a big fan of that. I don't think there's a single thing I would say you have to do this tomorrow except this one, which is try to think about what you're going to do with your pre-nursing students, because you have hundreds, if not thousands, of students who are going very far down unproductive paths, running up student loan debt, and they're not being redirected to places where they can get through and make money in the workplace to pay off all of their student loans. Now, we got to be careful. We don't want to do that sorting before we have a chance to see if they can make it, right? We're not just going to take all the students who had 3 9s in high school. I mean, from a strict, there's actually an argument to be made for that, but I think from an equity standpoint, that's a bad idea. I want everyone to have equal opportunity, and I want to support people to try to get through these things into the programs, but you've got 150 slots. That's not changing, right? So, not the only thing you could do, but here's what Stark State did, and I love it because it kind of takes in 3 or 4 of the big ideas. They actually asked the researcher, hey, how many of those 1,700 students you found have GPAs lower than 3.0? Now, they had a minimum GPA of 3.0 to get into their nursing program, but even if you don't have that, you've got a minimum, right? And it's probably more like 3.5 than it is 3.0. But they used 3.0, so they asked the question, how many of those 1,700 had GPAs lower than 3.0? The answer was 900. So 60% of them had GPAs lower than 3.0, right? Now what? So now we know that of all of these students who are pre-nursing, these ones are never getting in. Now, what they did was, and they kind of made a step into this, the 2.7 to 2.99 students, the ones who were near the top, and they actually also cut it in a matrix by the number of units they'd taken, because if you've taken more units, it's harder to move a GPA than if you've taken fewer. Someone often makes an algebra comment here, but I'll let it go. It's quantitative reasoning, damn it. It's still in algebra. So if you're 2.7 to 2.99, 27 to 299, they contact you and they say, Brian, we see that you are a pre-nursing student here at Stark State. You got a 2.83 GPA. Did you know we have a minimum 3.0 to get in the nursing program? And by the way, here's a link to an online GPA calculator so you can figure out how many courses you need to take to get there, right? Come talk to us if that doesn't work out well for you, because there may be a lot of courses, and we can redirect you into other things. But they gave the ones who were right at the bubble kind of a forward push, if you will. The 2.3 to 2.7 students, the one in the middle, they did the same thing. Said, Brian, we see you got a 2.55 GPA. Emmanuel left, by the way. That's why I changed to Brian. He's like tired of being used as a low GPA student. He's getting the defamation lawsuit ready right now. 2.55 GPA. Here's your GPA calculator. And by the way, you're likely to find it's 12 to 20 courses that you need to take at a 3.8, which I'm not sure why that would magically happen overnight, to ever hit a 3.0. Come talk to us. We have all these other great programs, not only in allied health, but in other areas like business and all these places. We can take what you've done already and help you get through. The 2.3 and below students, they put a hold on their registrations. Said you cannot register until you come talk to a counselor. The counselor got them in their offices and said, Brian, we see you're pre-nursing here. You've got a 2.1 GPA. You are never getting into the nursing program here at Stark State College. And we are requiring you to change your major. All is not lost. We're not asking you to leave the college. We want to help take what you've done and redirect it towards something. Now, I'm looking, by the way, at this room right now. The unease is felt most by my counselors right here, who are picturing what this would look like if they had to have this conversation. Which is, when I was sitting in the room, I'm like, yeah, I bet they got people crying in their offices and shouting, you're ruining my dreams. Which is exactly what happened. Students are in their offices crying, saying, I'm going to be a nurse. My mom wants me to be a nurse. Nursing, I want to make money. Crying, hysterical in their office. Now, that's horrible. But what Stark State said, and this is the kind of look yourself in the mirror question, what would we have done if we had done nothing? Is that a better solution for these students? And the answer in my book is no, because we know what's happening. They continue to take these courses. They're running up more student loan debt. And by the way, those are some of those students who then flock to for-profit nursing programs, right? Which, interestingly, they would be better off doing earlier. If that's going to be your solution, you'd rather not be 3 years of debt into it when you start, right? I mean, you would be better failing out of here more quickly to get there to try to start over. Now, I don't think that's going to work well either, and I still think the redirecting model's better. But I think what's happening now at 99% of colleges in the country, including everyone that I ever worked at, is these students are invisibly running through the system. If you guys catch them, if they come to you, but as we said earlier, they tend not to be the ones who show up, we try to help redirect them. Couple stories from the Florida State and Georgia State. If you're at Florida State University, which was one of the earlier progenitors of guided pathways as well, they don't talk about whether you're a freshman or a sophomore or a junior there. They talk about what MAP term you're in. There are 8 MAP terms to graduation. You at any point can click on any of their majors and see the MAP term. I'm glad they're attacking someone else, by the way. The gnats are moving from me, so it's not just me. You're in one of 8 MAP terms. If you don't meet the requirements to move to the next MAP term once, you're called in for mandatory counseling. Say, hey, we saw you had a rough semester. How do we get you back on track? Happens the second time you're required to change majors. Now that's draconian, right? I'm not telling you to do this. I'm saying it's at one end of a spectrum. But no one falls through the cracks there. You do not go down unproductive paths. Their graduation rate's 12 points higher now than it was a decade ago. They've done a bunch of things, right? But this is a big shift in the way we think about our students, right? It requires us, frankly, and I know we don't like doing this, to think of ourselves a little bit more like a good company that uses data about our customers, the students, to help monitor how they're doing and what we need to do. You have a vast database of information. I'm not saying this as an IR guy. I'm actually saying as a strategic consultant guy. You got all kinds of information on your students once they've started here. We don't use any of that. I mean, it's not because you have bad IR, it's because we don't ask the right questions and then do anything for the results. You don't need to do guided pathways tomorrow to be able to ask your IR person, hey, give me a list of everyone who's had a 2 to a 2.5 GPA who appears to be going to something competitive, not just nursing. There's a couple thousand of those students. You could do something with those tomorrow. Now, I do think it fits highly under number 2 and number 3 there and a little bit of number 1. If the paths were more clear, you'd have fewer students not wandering around chaotically. If we helped them get on a path, we'd do more of this up front. We wouldn't have 2,000 students thinking the only option is nursing because we'd be talking about the other 75 programs we have that help people get a job. And by the way, transfer also helps them get a job, right? Gets a job later. mean, because all of our students are thinking workforce, it's either direct entry or I went 9 straight years and ran up a hell of a lot of student loans I'm still paying off. But I went 9 straight years. I was thinking all of that time, I'm going to need a job at the end of this, right? So this transfer not being about career thing is ridiculous. It's everyone who transfers is thinking at some point that they're going to have a career too, okay? So I want to stop now and let you guys ask questions. These are the big ideas on the right. I could show you, I got some data points in here I could show you guys from other colleges. I think the big ideas here, though, are being much more clear about how students move through the institution, help them get onto those paths more clearly, and then monitoring their progress. And finally, the last one, making sure that they're learning, is really taking ownership over if these are our liberal arts outcomes, and we care about this, how do we achieve them at a higher rate than we're achieving them now? And by the way, I think one of the things you have to do there, because let me give you a scenario. I'm a student, I'm taking courses at Moorpark. You know that when I go to get my schedule for next semester, I'm not sitting there thinking, all right, I'm taking art history. So I need to balance that a little bit with a computational and critical thinking type course. I'm going to take Econ 1. That's never once happened in the history of your students self-picking their courses, right? But you could do that. When you put a program together, when the business faculty put a program together for any of the business programs, they could say, you know, we're going to have these 2 business courses in semester 3. You know what I think would really balance these are these 2 gen ed courses. And they all go together. Doing things like, for example, not picking 4 classes that have 80 pages of writing each in the same semester, unless you're in a literature major, right? Still probably a bad idea. But the point being, we can think students are randomly assigning themselves to these combinations of courses, and you're certifying that every single one of those billions of combinations results in the same outcomes. It is the opposite of backward design, right? It's the complete chaotic design. So I think there is, for those of you who care most about learning and the liberal arts outcomes, I still think this is your path to claiming re-ownership over this as institutions, of saying, what does this mean? What does it mean to be a graduate of Moorpark College? What does it mean to transfer with junior standing in a major? What does it mean to enter the workforce? And how do we make sure that those things are happening? So you can tell I get excited about this, and now it's the formal question part, so go ahead and start here.
So some students select courses, because not even if we said you should balance your coursework in this way, they're selecting it, and it's going back to what you said earlier about what's full time, but they're selecting it because it either fits their work schedule,
Yep.
they can stack it in 2 days, and so they're not thinking about what the balance is so much as how do I make it work with the
Right.
rest of my life.
What's your name?
Jody.
Jody. So Jody's grabbed on, there's a couple third rails of this whole process. You've grabbed on one of the early ones, which is scheduling, right? Scheduling is really hard to convert from the model we have now to a guided pathways model. Why? Because you know how we schedule now. Is the dean of your department says, hey, here's last semester's fall schedule, and we're going to roll it forward. Anyone want to teach anything? Chairs do it. Oh, sorry, whatever, whoever does that. We do this, right, we're gonna roll that for, anyone wanna, you wanna teach at 10? Okay, we'll move you to 10. It's never once been about when the students need to take courses, in what order. It was never set up for students or their work schedules. Now, we do this some, child development usually being a good example of this, right? You know when they're working, you know when you have to offer the courses. So intriguingly, going to a pathways model can help you with this. Now, my friends at Complete College America really push block scheduling as something to do. And I have to say, I think block scheduling is a fine idea. It's the idea that students are going to know exactly what courses they're going to take at what time. I do think this is highly useful for your students who work, to know that every semester, if I'm going to do this program, there are going to be courses I can take that fit my program to help me make progress towards a degree, and it's going to be Tuesday, Thursday from 10 to 3 p.m. 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's really helpful to your students who are trying to work, right? So I couldn't agree with you more. I think they're picking it for schedule. Because they don't know that there's any difference between their courses, they're using Pick a Prof or Rate My Prof, they're using these things, they're talking to their friends, and then at the end, they have classes that are full, they're just randomly taking courses, right? So this is one of the big deals about this, is once you start going down this path, you have to really look at how we schedule. There's some software assistance to this that's coming, but it really still is about business processes and the culture around scheduling. And I will say something that's a little controversial, if nothing else has been. We've had a history of offering the courses that faculty want to teach at the times they want to teach them, right? I'm going to call this out because I don't work here. And by the way, I am very sympathetic to that because that's what we've done for 70 years, right? It is an entirely indifferent endeavor to say, what courses do students need to take to get to where they want to go, and when should we offer them? Those are two completely different mind frames, right? And I joke sometimes when we're farther down the path on this, we may need some mourning for the old period of grief, for the old time frame, when we just thought about what we want to teach when we want to teach it, instead of what students need to take to get to where they want to go. There are some things you lose. I don't think there are a lot of things you lose, but there are some. My story I tell on this is when I was at Foothill, see if this sounds familiar, I was part-time psychology faculty as well as the researcher, which was brilliant because I lost money every time I taught. It's brilliant. I just clearly was doing this for the wrong reason, but I did love teaching, so I taught a psych class every quarter. And the dean came to me at one point and said, hey, Rob, we're down enrollment in psychology. Is there a course you can teach that we don't currently offer that you think students would take to help get our enrollment back? Now, I did not think, this is 2004, Rob. Today, I would have been like, dude, that's a really bad idea. In 2004, I said, yeah, of course there is. I mean, my doctorate's actually in psychology and the law and how juries make decisions. I taught a course in psych and law at grad school to grad students at U of O as a seminar. So I taught a grad seminar. I could probably turn that into an undergraduate course, right? And by the way, it was when CSI was coming out. Like this was like before we had CSI Toledo, it was just CSI. And before every 80s actor was in every 80s actor is now in a CSI. Good for them, good to have a platform. But this was all taking off, right? And so this was gonna be really popular. And so I didn't think about this. I turned it into an undergrad course, right? They fast-tracked it through curriculum and that experimental course thing that we do for a year, right? That sound familiar? And we offered it that next fall, 6 weeks later in the catalog. It had 50 student seat count. 49 signed up in the first hour, 48 showed up and passed, and I realized now I was screwing every single one of those students. Because that course meant absolutely nothing for them. It was just random transcript credit that never was going to be accepted at any CSU or UC. Maybe the University of Oregon Psych and Law doctoral program would have taken it. That wasn't, now, no, there was a way to potentially get that course approved and on a list, but that's not what we did. Right? So that was my pet course, if you will. I loved that course. I taught it twice. And I look back now going, man, that was a fun course to teach. But these students, that was just a course, maybe was getting more of them interested in psychology. Is it the only way to do that? Do we need more people interested in psychology? You know, brief rant there, by the way. Number 2 undergraduate major in the country is psychology. Business is 1, psychology is 2. Business is kind of an umbrella over like 20 different things. Psych is number 2. At any time, 14 to 15% of American undergrads are psych majors, which causes us to ask the question, at what point in American economy what percentage of workers are in jobs that are psychologist jobs? It's less than 1%. And every single one of those jobs requires a master's or a doctorate, which our students don't know who are majoring in psychology. So unless we're gonna reclaim the liberal arts outcome argument and say that any degree means something again, which we've lost, by the way. I don't know if we lost it or industry moved. We've lost that argument that any degree means you can do these certain things. We either got to reclaim that or we got to think differently about the fact that we have 1 out of 7 people at our college are majoring in psych and 1 in 100 of them will ever work in psych. Right? That's a big deal, okay? So but this idea though that, I've lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? Is it lunchtime? Scheduling, thank you. God, man, psych major scheduling. I was right in the middle of 3 really important things going on in my head, and only one of them involved beer. I was really how that goes. I wonder if there's a craft brewery around here. Look, something shiny. Maybe he needs a break. All right, other questions. So we have the schedule. Scheduling is absolutely an issue that you have to take on. Yes, Laura. You wonder why I know her name. Our kids went to the same school in San Mateo, so there's that. Small world.
Spiral.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so as an instructor, I see this as a top-down change that needs to happen, but there are a lot of instructors in here, and I'm an adjunct instructor, and so I see the same faces at the same meetings, and so I make changes at my level as an adjunct, but the other adjuncts that are freeway flying to other schools,
Yep.
they're not getting this information. How do we affect the whole
Great question, Laura. And 2 things in there. One is the top-down nature of this. If this is top-down, you're screwed. Right? If this is something that the leadership of the college decides to do without the base being activated, you have no chance of this working. At the end of the day, the second part of this, though, what you're trying, from a faculty standpoint, the number 1 big shift here is from a shift of focusing on courses to focusing on programs. That is not a trivial shift, right? Because, Laura, where it gets is, when we do this mapping, if you go through this process where you're going to map, what a business major looks like, what are the courses a full-time student would take over 2 years, maybe a part-time student takes over 4 years, to finish our business degree. And by the way, we need to make sure that that transfers so we don't create a path to something internally that actually means students are sophomores when they transfer. If we're going to do those things, I want the business faculty doing it. It shouldn't be a department chair or a dean or someone else. It should be the business faculty saying, for my students, or accounting's even better, by the way, because business is too broad. If you're an accounting faculty, someone is now going to ask you the question, hey, accounting faculty, what are the sequence of courses within your discipline a student needs to complete, and how are we going to arrange them into semesters? But then which gen ed courses do you think are best going to fit for graduates who are moving into accounting? And we're going to create what we call default program maps because of that. And the default program map is going to be what a student does. We hand them the accounting map, say, here's what we suggest you do. One of my friends like to say they're pathways, not prisons. If a student says, I want to take art history instead of music theory, and it fulfills the same requirement, you're probably going to let them do that, right? But what your students want is a clear path. Now, some of them, you can allow course substitution. So I think part of the point here, and I'll get to the adjunct as the third part, I made a third part, is that the top-down part has to meet the bottom-up part where we say collectively, we're going to do this. Now, in California, we have to do that. Right? It's statutorily mandated by the 10+1 issues that, although it's an interesting question whether arranging the courses into programs is a 10+1 issue, but we'll leave that for a future debate. I'm not sure where I fall on it. Point being that we have to do this from the bottom up and top down in California. I will tell you one thing about guided pathways reform, though, is so this is great because I have both faculty and student services in the room. What often happens is I have faculty in the room in the afternoon and student services in the morning, because that's how you do it. And we do shadow sessions. So the first session in the morning with student services, they go, wow, this guided pathway stuff is really cool. If you could just get those freaking faculty to give us some programs that have some structure in them, the world would be a better place. Then I go to the afternoon, and I have the faculty, and the faculty go, hey, we really like this guided pathway stuff. You keep those counselors from misadvising our students and from getting them into programs better and giving consistent information, this college would be a better place for our students. Point being, we got to work on this together. So the adjunct side of this is interesting because there are adjunct faculty who teach in gen ed programs and adjunct faculty who it's their program. They just happen to be adjunct. That scenario, the adjunct faculty who's in charge of a program, that's the one we're really going to have to wrestle with, because if we're going to do program mapping and you only have a part-time faculty with one program, that person's going to have to be involved in it. Now, on the gen ed side, if I'm an adjunct faculty in psychology, like I might have been if she hadn't fired me 20 years ago, which I don't remember, my role is different. Now, the question for me is, what's my role in the pathways movement? And this is, I think, a trick for professional development is, what's the changing role of faculty under a pathways model? It may be more about talking to your students more about where they are in their program, what kind of progress they're making, helping tie them to services, talking to them about transfer schools. You got your content of the program to teach, but it might be about the scaffolding. That has to have professional development around it. There's no way to do that. And we know that professional development for adjuncts is a problem. It's a problem in 99% of the colleges in the country. I think this is a subtle sign, by the way, that I need to wrap up. They're handing out the evaluations. Strike one, he goes too long. Yes, you can know that already. Last one, and then I will be around for lunch, I think, somewhere. Am I going to be around for lunch? Am I going to be here? Yeah. Emmanuel? If you have more questions, bring them. And those of you coming in the afternoon, we're going to explore this a lot further. But one more question to finish.
And the math and English placements that are coming down the pike that are, I mean, we can use multiple measures, but there are math and English placement assessments that are going to be more mandatory coming down the pike. How do we address developmental math and it taking so long for students to get up to that level, and how does that play into the pathways?
So some of us on the national scene weren't totally happy with all the energy that's gone in California into fixing the test problem. Because as you guys have known for years, the test isn't necessarily the issue, right? Whether you do self-placement or you have a placement test, I mean, you could make arguments that one's slightly better than other, but the data, by the way, shows it's pretty much similar, right? And I made this comment to some of the folks at the state level. The more time you spend on the test, the less time you spend thinking about how the curriculum and the actual curricular paths could be different. Now, obviously, the multiple measures movement, the Long Beach story of where they were about to put 90% of their students into Dev Ed English before they kind of cut that off with what they did at Long Beach, and they ended up putting 60% of students into transfer level English instead of 10, and had the same success rate. right? So that multiple measures idea that's come out of Long Beach is permeating the state. So that is happening. But I think a college has to come to peace with doing one of three things. What you're doing now, which has, by the way, definition of insanity, of course, is you do the same thing over and over, expect a different outcome. We know what will happen if you use the traditional model that we've used in math and English. We know exactly what will happen. The second option is to go down some sort of acceleration model, whether it's California Acceleration Project, Statway, Quantway. I call them extreme acceleration models because I'm talking about the ones where there's 1 semester prep and then a college level course. So they're 2 semester models. Or you go to CoREC, which is you try to do it in the same semester, which is partially what multiple measures is doing. I mean, multiple measures doesn't usually include that CoREC course. A couple colleges are trying that, so say, we're going to put you in the transfer level course, but we're going to scaffold support around it. I think those are your 3 big options. Like kind of stay where it is, go to extreme acceleration, or go to a CoREC model. It's a little easier in English because we're not having the debate at the state level about whether English 1A is English 1A is English 1A. English 1A is English 1A. Interesting in Ohio, by the way, one of those colleges is teaching 6 versions of English 1A for each of their 6 career clusters. Same course outline, different prompts, right? For business versus nat. So I thought that was kind of cool. But aside from that type of thing, it's more of a problem in math. And the reason it's a problem in math is not because of your math department. It's the reason because of this debate at the CSU primarily about Statway, is a statistics course and a quantitative reasoning course going to be accepted for most of these programs? I mean, that Tennessee model, by the way, only works because they also did guided pathways reform. So they know what program a student's in, and if they're going into STEM, they got to do some sort of remedial work to get through that. If they're going into any of the other 80%, though, they take quantitative reasoning or statistics. And so I think there's a state policy issue that has to play out on the math side a little bit. I would just be ready for that to be solved because it's just a matter of time. She says this is a 1B. She gets one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I was just curious, you mentioned like an example way back where you were trying to get faculty to do biology in 2 years. So did this guided pathways try to cram STEM into a shorter period of time?
No. STEM's, I mean, for the most part, are there degree programs that are 80 units? Yes. There are some states, by the way, that have started axing those, saying you got to get them down to 64 or lower. And did California do that, by the way? Yeah. So we don't have that issue as much as we used to, because we used to have a bunch of 80-unit programs, so we shouldn't have it as much. Although you guys are, from the looks on your faces, I can tell it's not there yet. I think the point is, however long the program is how long you structure it, right? So I don't actually, I do think shorter is probably better than longer in most cases, but if the program is 2 years in length at full time, you structure it at 2 years in length. If it's 2.5, tell them it's 2.5 and structure it that way, right? There's another angle to your story that we could also talk about what about the students who do really need to go part-time? And there are a number of approaches to that, by the way. Another Ohio College, Sinclair, they created a 4-year part-time map, as well as a 2-year full-time map for every single one of their programs. So if you have to go part-time, that's still an if, you better know that these courses are counting, right? Because if you're part-time and they're not counting, you're screwed. And by the way, from the data right now, you're pretty much screwed anyway, right? Because part-time student success rates hovered in the teens. So we already have this issue. So I think we need to figure out things to get them more full-time. But if they are truly going to be part-time, we got to make sure those courses count and keep them on path. And summer is really important as a way to bridge getting to 30 units, also to get people back on track. I think this is the one thing we're going to really need to do a lot more is use summer as, hey, you didn't pass this one class here. We need you to get back on track with this course. So even if you take one course over the summer, take this one, and then you can go back onto your full path in the fall. All right, we have to be done now. It's 12 o'clock exactly. I want to say that has never been done before. I want to thank you guys for your energy and time. I know it's warm in here, and thank you guys so much for your time.